Being a good OP, I'll start with my personal experience, feel free to discuss. Be me in 2006. Around 20 at the time. Decide we with girlfriend we should go for a vacation. Location located. Nice little village in South Germany. I'm a dumbass so I forgot the name of the place. We rent a small house at the edge of the village, literally the last house in there. We are told not to wander off into the forest. Obviously we don't do so because we are not completely dumbasses. First night is nothing special, we are tired and go to sleep. Next day Grill says she saw some lights in the woods last night. She cuts it off as some hooligans lighting fires or some shit. We go around village eating schnitzel and stuff. Get back to the place in the late evening. Go to sleep. Wake up in the middle of night for feeling my body really heavy, like I was under 20 meters of water. Try to fight it eventually and black out. Regain senses. I'm in the middle of the freaking forest in the middle of the night in nothing but my sleepwear and coat. I feel kinda woozy with a strange headache. Feel something in front of me. Touch it, feel stony. The moon shines on it and it looks like a big ass stone, similar to picture. Something in my head tells me to touch a specific area on the stone. Ain't gonna argue with my head so touch it. The part of the stone next to my hand literally slips into the ground, like a door or bulkhead or something. At this part I'm literally not in control of my body and panicking because of it. The open clearing is not big at all, it's like 1 meter by 1 meter area with a height of 2 meters. Enter and feel the ground descending with me. Elevator. Find myself in a big ass chamber. Smells like an old cellar, moldy and moggy. My body is acting like it's being remote controlled and heads into the far part of the chamber. I don't want to go there, I panic, I just want to get out of the place. On the way I go past a few weird stone sculptures which resemble something like humans with empty faces. I mean the head is in place but on the front there is just one big opening on all of them, pic related I'm not an artist. Stop in the back of the chamber right in front of one of them statues. Look at it, it is creepy as fuck and I'm crying on the inside from terror. It's mossy a bit. As I'm investigating this thing I hear something from behind and tactically shit myself since I cannot move. It's like stone being pushed on another stone. My eyes filling up with tears as the feeling of helplessness comes over me. Then the fucking thing grabs me by the shoulders. Looks at me with that hole of his face. My head wants to explode from the pain. I am used to having migraines, but this is a whole new level of headaches. The hole in the face glows up red. I see pictures in my head, like memories, but not my memories. Some I can recall, an ancient burning city, an earthquake somewhere in Greece, strange streets filling up with water. It's like they have been here all along and for some reason giving me those memories? While extracting minds? Then the stuff releases me and I regain control of my body. Dash to the point where I entered the whole thing. The others are moving as well. Usain Bolt.exe. Reach the elevator stuff, jump in and smash the stone. Ascending to the surface. From this point it's kinda missing just pictures I have. Running in forest. Crossing a small kinda source. Wake up. It's morning. Holy shit, it was just a dream, thank God. GF asks, where were you in the night? You were nowhere to be found and your coat was missing too. My face when. Gentlemen, due to a story night last night I feel the need to break an order I was given and tell you about the Missouri Goat Man. Now I'm a chemical guy and we all go to Fort Lost in the woods to do training. This happened during an FXT out in the woods, next to a ride in a large stream bed. Every night there is a roaming guard of 2 privates and we have our gay little blank adapters, and we just roam around making sure no one is having sex. This happens one night when me and a buddy of mine are posted up on a couple of stumps by one of the light systems they drag out there. About 3 o'clock me and my pal are set up under the lamps, soaking in the warm exhaust because it's 25 degrees Fahrenheit outside, and fuck if we were going to be moving. We are watching the tents, joking how if anyone was going to do the nasty, it'd be difficult due to the cold, etc. Nudge buddy, tell him to catch a nap. He lolls off and is snoozing. Snow slowly drifting down through the trees, peaceful. Just kind of staring into the woods, when I heard that crunch of snow. Extremely faint, have to perk up my ears to make it out. Think to myself, there's no way some idiot's going to freeze his nuts to some girl's ass, must be a drill sergeant. Nudge my buddy awake, tell him there's a drill sergeant in the woods. He perks up, we are both watching the woodline. Sure enough we see a shadow come in from the woodline, crouching low, amazing he can be this quiet in the snow. We both grin, last time this happened they dragged someone out and tied them to a tree for shits and giggles. The shadow gets well within the camp line, crouching really low looking back it was weird. A tent rustles and the shadow instantly stands up to full height, fucking is almost 7 feet tall and has goddamn horns on its fucking head. Buddy and I suck in our breath and our eyes are wide, this isn't a fucking drill sergeant. The whatever it was, opens the tent flap really slowly and peeks inside. At this time my buddy has found the little radio we were given in case we need to contact the drill sergeants. Buddy is freaking out and trying to get them out here, which caused them to freak out and come ghosting out of the fucking shadows. They startle us and my buddy yells. We all hear a loud grunt. All our heads turn to see this goat thing dragging a goddamn private. It has a female private. It has her leg. Holy shit. It's dragging her out of the camp. Nothing really happens for what feels like hours, just a surreal fucking stare down. A female drill sergeant screams out a war cry and launches herself at a full sprint at it. Rest of the drill sergeants pull out their pistols and charge down to try get the private. He hops up and runs down, scrambling to grab the chick and haul her away. The drill sergeants have taken off to chase whatever it was away from the camp. As we are dragging the chick away, the entire camp is up now and setting up a perimeter around the AHA and Chow tent. 2 areas that have constant light. Tense as fuck, everyone has their bayonets in their hands. Drill sergeants come back an hour later, looking worse for wear. Everyone loads up in the Humvees and we get the fuck out of there. Apparently the drill sergeants had chased the damn thing over a creek, at which it took off into the underbrush. The female soldier was okay, whatever it was had smothered her till she passed out. Higher command was weirded out but didn't seem fazed and had simply made the drill sergeants carry fully loaded M4s for the next rotations. Oh big scary goat man? Nah don't worry about it, here's bigger guns. Yay army. And there are tons of these stories, of people just tearing ass out of the woods in full kit blubbering and get discharged due to mental instability. I myself only have one other story and this is from a friend of mine who went to MP training there. Friend is on the last FXT in the dead of winter. Her is set up with 3 other people in a tower overlooking a huge expanse of woods. Scheduled up for attack happens, everyone having fun shooting blanks. Cack. Suddenly a couple of dudes come barreling out of the woods carrying a guy who has a fucking tree branch lodged in his thigh. Everything stops, everyone leaps into action and drags him onto the FOB. He is screaming and crying about the Deerman. Drill sergeants instantly scramble for their M4s and get on a loudspeaker, demanding every private into their little hutches. Drill sergeants break a major rule and hand out live ammo to everyone. Everyone is tense as fuck. That one dude is screaming, the Deerman, he's out there, Jesus Christ protect me, the Deerman on keeps screaming until the medics arrive. Here's one I posted before, but here it is again for anyone who missed it. Before 5 years ago. Friend is down for the summer, going to college to be a pilot. Needs hours for flying time so he rents planes out of Martinsburg, West Virginia. Out flying one sunny summer day he notices a half-built abandoned house in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere. Calls me that night to go check it out, we like exploring old abandoned places. Go check it out that night, raining like a motherfucker, hot as fuck. Arrive in Inwood, West Virginia, and drive for roughly 45 minutes. No houses or buildings of any sort. Friend had the coordinates of the house programmed into his GPS. Find the road the house is off of. Road is extremely narrow, not possible for two full-size vehicles to pass, only woods and overgrown fields. After another 10 to 15 minutes, he says here it is. No spot to pull over, so he finds a low point in the field and parks. He had the AC on so the windows were up. Open the door and the car is flooded with the smell of decay and rot. What the fuck, that's weird. Get out anyways, and I almost stepped on a decapitated chicken body. The field was filled with mutilated animal carcasses, could barely take 5 steps without seeing a body or animal part, heads, rib cages, limbs all from deer, more chickens, various other commonplace animals. The field is huge and we had flashlights, but the house would be a little walk still. The field is overgrown and surrounded by woods. After walking a few minutes, my friend says, "What is that?" Shine my light over to where he has his aimed. Looks like a slumped over person on a chair. Let's check it out. It was only a couple blankets piled up on an old lawn chair. This part of the field wasn't as overgrown and mostly dirt on the ground, not as many weeds. Look around and discovered that it was a party area or something. Shot up old televisions, piles upon piles of beer cans, truck tires, more blankets and 2 sawhorses, one knocked over, with a large piece of plywood laying nearby with red Solo cups and a few ping pong balls. Didn't take a genius to see it had been a beer pong table. Interesting enough, I noticed a set of wide tire tracks passing through the dirt and mud close to the beer pong table. Friend yells, "Hey man! Look at this. It's an almost full case of beer." We started wondering what happened here. Looked like a party had been going on and they left in a hell of a hurry. Half full cans of beer sitting around, more lawn chairs, stuff people would have taken with them. We grabbed the case of beer and both came to the conclusion that the partiers had left in a hurry, for what reason we didn't know. It must have been something bad to make some West Virginia boys leave their beers and get out in a hurry like that. Doubted cops had been called on in an area as remote as this. We're lugging the case of beer back to his car. Still haven't found the house yet. I hear something big moving through the woods behind us. It moves slowly and deliberately. I hunt and know what a deer sounds like. It wasn't a deer, sounded like something moving on 2 legs. We both stopped, asking each other if you heard it. The movement stops. When we started walking again, so did it, still staying just deep enough in the woods we couldn't see it. Let's get the fuck out of here. Both of us get to his car and haul ass out of there. On the way home, we both agree it sounded like someone stalking us. Next day was a hot humid Friday. Friend calls me up in the afternoon and asks if I wanna check out the place again and try to find the house. I said yes since it was still sunny out and we both said it was probably just an animal last night and let our fears get the best of us. Just in case, friend brings his 9mm and I bring a baseball bat. Get to the field again, not nearly as scary in the late afternoon with the sun out. Go to park on the same spot again, only to find a no trespassing sign up. What the fuck? Something was smeared on the white sign, brownish. I get out to look, and hear crunching under my boots. There was bits of shattered glass, nails and screws laying everywhere at the low spot on the embankment to the field. It couldn't have been there last night or we would have got a flat tire. Look at the sign more closely. Brown smears are blood from a freshly decapitated chicken lying at the bottom of the signpost. Got the fuck out of there in a hurry. My face when we were stalked by a possible cult member who didn't want us in the field where they perform their rituals and sacrifices. Figured they ran the party people out too. Haven't returned since. My granddad told me stories, once. Something terrified my mother's side for damn near 2 generations. Never hurt anyone. Just really loved scaring the shit out of people and livestock. They lived it well. What's now my granddad's? Be my granddad, as a young man. Be riding through woods on a horse and buggy at night, with Uncle M. Comfy lantern.jpg. just rolling. Hear something moving behind the wagon. Stops the wagon. Something stops. Look back, it's outside the light. Don't see any eyes. Start moving, it starts moving too. Stop again, it stops. Cock shotgun. GIF. They start moving again and it starts grinding and snapping its teeth. Hurry the horse back into the yard. It stops at the tree line. This ties in a little later with one interesting detail, bear with me. After that night, the animals start acting strange. They're out grazing during the day, free to roam. Around 3 p.m. they all, as a group, come back to near the house despite it not being feeding time. Every day. For months. They seem nervous. They don't lose weight though. They don't become unhealthy despite the stress. They just leave the woods at a certain time every day for no reason at all. Once everything cleared out of the woods. Livestock plus deer, coyotes, foxes, rabbits, everything scrammed. Predator and prey, fleeing together. The family being country-strong rednecks, doesn't give a damn. The power of Christ. MP4. After months of this, Granddad, his cousins, and go out coon hunting. Got the dogs with pretty big mud breed, some kind of hounds. They see nothing sketch about this. They're hunting for hours, don't find anything, dogs barking and sniffing around. The dogs stop and go full alert. The armed men folks stop and do same. The dogs fucking bolt. The men, deciding they're not going to one day be depicted as horror film characters, do the same. They hear it behind them. Sounds like it's on 2 feet, it's not galloping but running. Make it back to the house, run in. Ma, there's some weird shit going on out here. Silence, everybody standing in living room tense. Something slams onto the front deck, sounded like it jumped off the roof. Then there is a loud scratch down the side wall of the house, from side to side, like someone ran a knife down the boards, which are lapped over each other and not smooth. Everybody what the fucking? The animals in the barn start going fucking crazy. Livelihoods threatened. MP4. Everybody's trapped, everybody goes outside and starts creeping to the barn. Mules so freaked they break out of the stalls and kick the door out, flee into the woods. They can hear something moving around in the rafters. It had the high ground. Everybody aims and waits. They hear a thud a good 20 feet away, and then nothing. They go back inside, and don't sleep. Daylight comes. They gather the scattered animals and investigate. They find a footprint. In my granddad's words, it was hooved, like a cow, but with claws like an eagle. There ain't no animal. 3 talons. Now go back and look at the Burney Relief, the one I attached earlier. Coincidence? That a Mesopotamian artist put that little detail into a relief, then thousands of years later something with feet like that fucks with my immediate ancestors, and later I get approached by said goddess in a dream? Maybe. But I think that's quite a coincidence, coupled with everything else. It never hurt anyone. Nothing happened after that night until years later. Be my mother, preteen. Poor family, share bedroom with brother upstairs. Have bed next to open window because no AC, summertime. Sleeping. Something leans in through the window and breathes in their faces. Screams and runs downstairs like life depends on it. Be grandmother, 5 minutes before this. Be dreaming. A figure she never described, she's dead now, says, "Wake up, it's about to happen." Wakes up. Grabs and holds the screaming kids when they make it to her. Other little stuff around that time. Porch swing would swing when there was no wind and nobody had touched it. You would hear your name being called, but nobody called you. Little things. Later that house got struck by lightning and burned down, they rebuilt to his current house. And that was the last of it. But then, maybe it was just a tweak to the timeline to ensure something. Maybe those stories somehow came up in conversation on a date between my parents. Maybe that terror strengthened my people's faith. Maybe. Or maybe, it was just for me and what I came to know. Maybe. Conjecture. I know who I'm at and what she's done. And I know terrible justice has been guaranteed for the people that have kept humanity rolling in the shit, when her son came to lead us to so much more. They left out the best parts. Girlfriend decides that it's a good time for me to meet her family that live all the way in Oregon. I agree. Decide to drive there because I'm a fucking sissy when it comes to planes. When we finally get there, I'm introduced to girlfriend's parents, older sister, younger brother, and great-grandmother. Girlfriend's dad and great-grandma talk about their family and the story about how girlfriend's great-great-grandfather moved off the res and became a fisherman, etc. Girlfriend's dad goes fishing, takes me and girlfriend's brother along. We go deep in the woods for a river filled with salmon. After a couple hours it gets really fucking dark. Girlfriend's dad decides it's a good idea to come home and packs up. Girlfriend's brother keeps talking about rabbits because he likes them. Walk for a few hours and girlfriend's dad realizes we're lost. Hear a fuck ton of noises around us. Girlfriend's brother gets scared. Girlfriend's dad calms him down, continue to figure where the fuck we are. Girlfriend's brother sees a rabbit. Decides to chase because he's a dumbass. Me and girlfriend's dad chases after him but we lose him due to how dark it is. Girlfriend's dad decides to split up, call him out on how stupid that is, but goes forward with the idea. Follow some footsteps while hearing a bunch of random ass noises. Walks into a random field with a log laying in the middle. Girlfriend's brother is just calmly fucking sitting on the log. Yell at him for being an idiot until I realize something is off. He's being really quiet. Go up to him and ask if he's okay. Put my hand on his shoulder. He starts groaning and head shakes. What the fuck? JPG. His head fucking falls off. His head is still fucking groaning. I run away from whatever the fuck that was. I could still hear his groaning. I bump into girlfriend's dad after running for who fucking knows. He asks why the fuck I look so terrified until he hears the groaning too. He sees something behind me. Doesn't tell me what it is but tells me to run. The groaning sound is behind me but sounds a lot more deep. Finally get out of the forest, groaning stops. Get to the house. We hear the groaning again, but distant. Me and girlfriend's dad see girlfriend's sister and mom on the ground. We get out into them. Girlfriend's sister has a really bad neck wound and is bleeding pretty bad. Turns out girlfriend's mom was attacked by something and girlfriend's sister went to see what the fuck was happening. Girlfriend and her great-grandmother come back after a long trip into the city. Everyone is tense. Bring girlfriend's mom and sister and try to treat their wounds. The nearest hospital is several miles away and both vehicles are almost out of gas. Phone doesn't work due to some nearby mountains. Girlfriend's mom is getting better but girlfriend's sister is getting worse. She's sweating really fucking bad and hyperventilating. She vomits blood and this weird black shit. Girlfriend's mom is scared about where girlfriend's brother is. It's late at night so one person watches over girlfriend's sister while everyone else sleeps. At some time in the middle of the night I wake up to hear the front door swing wide fucking open. Realizes the girlfriend's sister is gone. Wakes up everyone and tells what happened. Girlfriend's mom is in a haze and runs out the door looking for her. Girlfriend's dad follows her with a gun. Me and girlfriend's great-grandmother stay at the house in case if anyone returns. Girlfriend and her dad come back not knowing where girlfriend's mom is. Sometime later, girlfriend's great-grandma looks out a window. Says that girlfriend's mom is running straight to the front door. Let her in and she's covered in mud and blood and was an emotional mess. Turns out she saw girlfriend's sister and followed to same fucking field I found girlfriend's brother and says she looks very skinny and her skin was loose and dry. Girlfriend's great-grandma says she knows what this is. Turns out girlfriend's great-grandma has known about this creature since the death of girlfriend's great-grandfather. They are native to this land and these things killed girlfriend's great-grandfather. After killing girlfriend's great-grandfather, girlfriend's great-grandma hadn't seen a thing until 2008. Turns girlfriend's grandpa was found mutilated in the woods that year. Everyone wonders what to fucking do. Girlfriend's great-grandmother says to just sleep through the night and ignore any sound from the woods. Everyone is pretty exhausted and tired, so everyone was okay with that. Everyone sleeps besides girlfriend's great-grandmother. Morning comes. Girlfriend's parents discuss if they should report to the police. Girlfriend's great-grandmother says they won't believe them. Girlfriend's dad gets some gas and fills up both cars. Girlfriend's dad says it's a good idea for me and girlfriend go back to Kansas. Girlfriend asks where they'll be. Girlfriend's dad says they have a house in southeastern Oregon. We're okay with this and say our goodbyes. Girlfriend goes to car. She screams. Me and girlfriend's dad go to see what she's screaming at. The decaying head of girlfriend's brother is in the car's back seat. Girlfriend's dad takes the head and buries it. Tells us to start driving so we can be safe. Girlfriend says one more goodbye and we drive back to my dorm. Both me and girlfriend are still trying to process whatever the fuck encountered. It gives us chills when we talks about it. Here's one about my grandma's crazy, abusive stepmom. My grandma is a tiny 4'10" woman. Nicest person I know. Compassionate, incredibly humble. Mom tells me it's because she grew up with a literal wicked stepmother. Described her as evil. Mom grew up around her too. I asked grandma about this one day. She tells me that her stepmother was very abusive. Apparently grandma's dad traveled for work. He'd be gone for weeks at a time. During that time, her stepmom would put grandma through hell. Grandma proceeds to tell me the following story. When she was still a little girl, her stepmom told her that she had a severed head, hidden away somewhere. This severed head could talk, and it told stepmom secrets. Stepmom told grandma that if grandma ever lied or misbehaved, the head would rat her out. Naturally, grandma grew up nervous about doing anything bad. Stepmom would ask her to do the most insane shit and grandma would just do it, no questions asked. One example she gave was that her stepmom asked her to walk 10 miles away to retrieve water from a creek in a little container. Stepmom laid down some rules. Grandma wasn't allowed to set the container of water down anywhere. And she couldn't drink any of it. And she couldn't take any of her own water either. So basically grandma had to walk 10 miles in the blistering heat, then 10 miles straight back, all without any water and all without stopping to rest, or she'd technically be setting the water down. And she had to do this all for a little bit of water even though they had a water well out behind her house. Stepmom would always be waiting by the well for grandma to get home. Sometimes she beat her, sometimes she didn't. Didn't matter how perfectly grandma followed instructions. But she could always tell when a beating was coming because stepmom would be pacing by the well, looking agitated. She'd claim the head told me what you did. And beat the fuck out of grandma for no reason. As she got a little older, grandma started developing a spine, asserting herself a bit more. Stepmom responded by telling her the story about how she got the severed head. Said it belonged to her ex-husband. Stepmom slit his throat one night while he was sleeping. To avoid suspicion from her neighbors, she slashed her own arms and legs. Blamed her husband's death on a group of bandits, claiming they tortured them both. Stepmom showed grandma the scars where she'd cut herself. Said that if grandma didn't act right, she'd make another severed head out of her dad. And maybe one out of you. Grandma ran out of the house crying. Stepmom laughing like a maniac as she ran off. Grandma ended up in the woods. She sat under a tree for a long time, crying, until she wore herself out and fell asleep. When she woke up it was after dark. She'd been there for hours. She got up and hurried home. She gets closer to the house, she's quiet so as not to wake stepmom. She's slowly approaching the water well behind the house when she hears two voices. Can't really hear them at first. eases closer and can just make out Stepmom standing by the water well. Sounds like she's talking to someone, but Grandma doesn't see anyone there. There's definitely another voice though, which Grandma doesn't recognize. But her first thought is, she's talking to the head. In Grandma's mind, the head knows everything. And it's the main reason she's terrified of Stepmom. So she panics at first, thinking the head knows she's there, eavesdropping, and that it's going to tell her Stepmom. But apparently that doesn't happen. So Grandma keeps listening. Stepmom keeps talking, the other voice answers. Stepmom's just asking a bunch of weird questions that don't make much sense. The voice speaks really slow and has a deep voice. Grandma is suddenly curious about what it looks like. She tries to get closer. But all she can see is the well, and Stepmom's silhouette in the dark. Then the other voice says clearly, "Someone is listening." Grandma freezes. Stepmom's silhouette ducks quickly down behind the well. It pops back up and looks around. Then hurries away towards the house and disappears inside. Grandma stays perfectly still for a long time. She's worried that her stepmom might be secretly watching from the house. But she's also thinking that it looks like she put something down on the ground before she left. She thinks she left the head behind. After a long while of standing still, Grandma slowly begins approaching the well, crawling along the ground. She reaches the well and her hands feel a strange patch of grass. She feels around. It's a pile of dead grass and leaves. It's covering something. Grandma feels around some more. There's a small handle underneath. She tugs at it. A door lifts up. It's a secret compartment in the soil. Down in the ground, about 2 feet deep, is a wooden box. Grandma thinks this is what she keeps the head in. She's almost afraid to touch it, but she lifts it out of the ground. It's very heavy. Places it down on the ground next to her. She actually whispers, "Hello?" thinking it might answer, but nothing happens. She wants to look inside but can't bring herself to. She decides she's going to get rid of this evil thing. Still worried that her stepmom might be watching, Grandma crawls on her hands, keeping to the shadows. She lugs the heavy box behind her as she goes until she's a good distance from the house. She remembers a huge empty tree trunk that she passed in the woods earlier and decides it's a good place to dump the thing. She hurries into the woods as fast as she can, carrying this heavy box, and dumps it into the hollow tree trunk. Then she slowly makes her way back home. When she gets there, her stepmom is wide awake, sitting at the table. She asks Grandma where she's been. Grandma tells the truth, "I fell asleep in the woods." Usually stepmom either flies into a rage or threatens to ask the severed head if she's lying. But instead she just orders Grandma to bed. The next night, Grandma sneaks out of the house, returns to the tree trunk where she stashed the box and retrieves it. Sets it on fire. Makes sure it's totally burned before she heads back. The next morning, her stepmother can't get out of bed. Grandma checks on her and finds her face looks warped. Said it looked sideways, like her mouth was entirely on one side of her face. After that, stepmom was always very frail. The severe beatings pretty much stopped. Grandma was never sure if there was actually a head inside the box. She never found any bones when she burned it. But I know what I heard at the well, and she wasn't alone out there. I think serial killers are people with some messed up bits of code in their heads that are a leftover from our more predatory ancestors. I personally had some experience with a serial killer in my hometown if anyone is interested. It's not your typical X story, but it's still interesting enough. I was going up for a hike in these canyons like I normally do a couple times a month. It's a great spot and good for exercise. There's an old train bridge that goes across the ravine at some point. I say old but it's been rebuilt recently. Anyhow, I decided to explore underneath the bridge and see what's down there. There's a lot of old abandoned rusty parts from construction, beer bottles and a camping chair for some reason. I can hear what I'm pretty sure is people talking / walking up above. At some point I hear what sounds like a cry for help, so I shout back and get a response. I run closer, but then there's a crash and a thud in the trees up ahead of me. I push through the bush as fast as I can, very slowly, and find the body lying there. I'll spare you any gruesome details, but to say the least, the injuries were incompatible with life. I shout up for help, but they either don't answer or can't hear me. I freak out and try to call 911, but this place is pretty remote and cell service is mostly non-existent. At this point I am not sure whether to move the body with me to the trail or leave it where it is. I decide it's probably a bad idea to mess with a potential crime scene, and plus I don't want to get all bloody or carry a gross, disgusting mangled corpse around. As I head back to the path, I can hear twigs/branches snapping in the distance. It's pretty much impossible to move in thick brush without making any noise. This person was trying, but without a whole lot of success. I immediately got a flash of, oh shit, when I realized that they might not have friendly intentions. It's hard to explain, but just the way they were moving, it sounded like they were trying to make as little noise as possible. So why would someone be doing that? And right after someone calling for help fell off the bridge? And after I had been screaming for someone to help? Fight or flight response kicked in. I sort of ignored my instinct and went for an intermediate option. I went a ways back into the brush and hid myself while still having a decent vantage point of the area the body had fallen in. The noise coming through the brush got closer and closer, and after about 5 minutes I could see someone walking down the slope towards the body. Their clothing wasn't remarkable. I honestly don't even remember what they were wearing. As for a description, I'm really not the best kind of person for that. I don't remember really specific details much like that, so all I can really say is the guy wasn't very tall, probably around 40-ish years old, and had some sort of hat on. Clothing was muted, no bright colors, but it was still easy to see him. The guy walks up to the body, and looks all around, probably looking for me. When he can't find anything, he goes back to the body, starts examining the wounds. The main thing I remember about his manner is that it was predatory. His walk, posture, it all screamed to me that this man was a predator. The man pulled a small folding spade out of his backpack and proceeded to drag the body further into the forest. I could tell he'd done this before, just on the basis of how confident and assured he seemed to be. I waited for the noise to fade away, then got up and moved as quietly as I could back toward the trail that leads back down to the park entrance where my car is. It took me about 4 hours to get here, so it's not exactly an easy hike back. After a certain point I stopped trying to be quiet and just sort of half-run/jog the best I can through the tangle of trees, brush, dead logs and uneven terrain. It takes me a bit, but I get back to the trail, so I take a quick breather before heading back up the slope to the main trail. That's when I hear a sound. It's faint, barely noticeable, but I'm always paranoid for bears/cougars on hikes, so I have a pretty good ear for these things. I sort of realized all at once that this guy was a lot smarter than I'd given him credit for, that he somehow knew I would be watching or saw me and pretended to walk off to bury the body to give me a false sense of security. My first instinct is to just dash off down the trail like a retard, running and screaming for help. I came so close to doing that. If I had, I honestly think I wouldn't be here today to tell the story. The whole thing is a bit of a blur in my mind, but I recall thinking about how he had outsmarted me and basically tricked me into thinking he hadn't seen me while he followed me covertly. Thinking about it, I wonder just how long he'd known I was there. He probably had seen/heard me from the top of the bridge, maybe watched me for a while when he came down? It's hard to say because this is all stuff I'm thinking of in retrospect. But it was clear in the moment that he had outsmarted me because I'd underestimated him, and that he was much more dangerous than I'd first anticipated. He was moving with uncanny silence now. If I hadn't been aware of him, I wouldn't have hurt him at all. I actually hadn't hurt him at all for a few minutes, and I was scared that he was way too close for comfort at this point. So rationally, assuming that he couldn't catch/kill me if I ran away was dumb. The smartest way to play it would be to pretend I didn't know he was following me. So I made a show of being upset/scared and trying to make a call on my phone. Of course there is no service, before going back up the trail. As the trail reaches the top of the canyon, it continues along in various straight stretches for quite a ways. Basically, it's hard for someone to sneak up on you because it's a big long straight gravel trail and more of a gravel road than anything else. I actually see 4x4 vehicles driving on it every now and then. I have a really good feeling he's behind me, but I'm too afraid to turn and look behind me because then I think he'll know I know he's following me. But at the same time, maybe not looking as suspicious. But I pretty much decide to keep walking ahead, hurried pace but not too fast even though my heart is pounding like a jackhammer. After a while walking, I take out my phone and pretend to try and make another call on it, but I actually take a quick sneak at the reverse camera selfie thing on the camera app and I'm able to confirm that he is in fact on the trail, following behind me. I'm a few minutes away from full-blown panic and still trying to stay as normal as possible while this killer is stalking behind me. Does he have a gun? If he has a gun he could be shooting me at any moment. It could just be lights out, my life shut off without me even having the courtesy of hearing the bullet before it disconnects my brain. Should I just charge him? Try to ambush/surprise him? Is he waiting for something? When is he going to make his move? What the fuck should I be doing? That's pretty much the shit that was going through my head. I had no idea what I was going to do. Then I had the thought that he knew that I knew he was following me. What if I'd underestimated him again? What was he planning? I'm not sure if it was adrenaline or fear that caused the response, but something just sort of clicked inside me. I realized that this guy was a predator, and that he was familiar with the chase. He delighted in the fear of his victims. He could probably read the fact that I knew he was following based on my body language. He could probably tell I was terrified out of my mind. And he was probably getting off on it. So I did the one thing he would never have expected. I stopped, turned around and started walking towards him. I don't know where I got the confidence from, but it came out of nowhere. All of a sudden I wasn't scared, I was angry. I was furious. I was the opposite of scared. He was obviously a bit confused, as he stopped walking to stare as I came toward him. As I came further, I pulled the 6-inch buck knife I keep on me for bears out, tossed it off to the side like it was worthless as I kept walking toward him. I'm not sure why I did that, even now. I was basically acting on pure, primal instinct at that point. The memories I have of it are almost in third person, like I'm watching someone else. In any case, whatever the reason, I tossed my knife away, screamed at the top of my lungs while pounding my chest and charged him at full speed. I was around 20 feet from him when he pulled what I think was a gun out of his waistband. I'm honestly not sure because I never got a good look at it. If it was a gun, maybe the safety was on, it jammed, or it was a fake. God knows. All I remember from that point is slamming into him, wrapping my arms around him in a bear hug. I had about 4 to 5 inches on him height-wise and probably around 50 pounds in weight. I don't remember how long the struggle lasted, but it ended when I chucked him off the side of the path into the ravine, which was at this point of the trail, an extremely steep slope that was basically 800 feet nearly straight down to the riverbed. You've probably heard of the adrenaline giving you a shit ton of strength thing, and I'm absolutely certain it's true because I literally picked him over my shoulder and tossed him a good 10 feet straight out from the path before he began to fall. I saw the whole thing in slow motion as I did it. The panic and fear in his eyes, the struggle, the panic, the flailing as he began to fall. Weirdly enough, I had a boner afterwards. Are stress/rage boners a thing? Who fucking knows? Anyway, I took a while to collect myself and then I just kept walking back to my car. And yes, I still hike there to this day, because fuck letting that dickhead take my favorite hiking spot from me. B8. No close neighbors in country, miles of forest. Creek in little valley/gully below house. Play there with our super dog German Shepherd. Dog acting weird, nervous. Bark talk, Let's go home, bro. Leaving, coming back, leaving, coming back. Doggone. Whatever, keep looking for crawdads in Creek. Hi. You're new. What the fuck? JPG Fallen Creek. Happy girly giggling. MP5. Prettiest little girl I've ever seen standing at edge of clearing. Sorry. Didn't mean to scare you. Says her name is Becca. Looks my age, give or take a year. Never occurs to me / don't care I should have seen her at school. So pretty she bypasses 8-year-old cootie zone. Long, jet black hair and green eyes, wearing tomboy clothes, plain white t-shirt, cut-off blue jeans, and barefoot. Literally burned into my mind. GF for life. 8-year-old game kicks in. Tell her I'm catching crawdads to put in my aquarium. Ask her if she wants to come to my house and see it. How far is it? Tell her it's just over the hill. Oh. Confused. GIF, it must be new. Climbs up in this big beechnut tree in the clearing that sort of grows across the creek at an angle. Makes me think of Bagheera, only sexy and female, and hashtag me not old enough to understand any of this. Tell her we moved in 3 years ago, so yeah, I guess it's pretty new. Oh. Just over that hill? Points. Explain yeah, and on out of the woods. It's not far, please be my gf.txt. Mama says I'm not supposed to leave the woods. Okay, a little weird. Single-minded.jpg. Keep talking, I'm already a bit of a geek, so talking about frogs and crawdads and comic books and Star Wars. She doesn't say much, but she just seems happy to listen, tells me where to look for what she calls the good crawdads. I'm stunned that she hasn't seen Star Wars. I tell her the whole story, she's fascinated. I'm fascinated by her. Starting to get dark. Tell her I have to go. She seems kind of sad, begs me to stay a little longer and talk. Do you know any more stories? Tell her I do, but I really do have to go. Promise to come back tomorrow and bring some of my comics and my lightsabers. She seems legit excited. As I'm leaving the clearing, turn back to look at her again and say see you tomorrow. But she's already gone. Get home. Mom notices I'm acting different and asks me what's put me in such a good mood. Lie and say it's just that I found some really nice crawdads for my tank. Didn't get it then, but I do now. I had a secret romance brewing. Telling anybody would ruin it. Tomorrow. WMV, Saturday edition. Mom and Dad sleeping in. Get up early by sheer force of will and sneak comics and toys out my window. Start chores, hide my bag in edge of woods and cut the grass. Tell folks I'm going to the creek and feel like I'm floating all the way there. Becca's in the tree, dropping flower petals in to bait the fish. Prances over, all excited to see what I've brought. Immediately fixates on the lightsabers. We play fight for hours. I teach her how to make lightsaber noises. We chase each other through the woods, laughing and having a great time. Fondest childhood memory. She's better than me, quicker. Runs faster than me and she's not even wearing shoes. Later sit under beechnut tree and read comics. She likes me to do voices, so I read and point while she looks over my shoulder at the pictures. Later, I realize she's wearing the same clothes. Later, I realize that she probably can't read. Lunchtime. Hear Mom calling me off in the distance. Becca looks scared. I don't understand why, but I don't say anything. Ask her if she wants to come over for lunch. She gets sad and says she should go. I get a little frustrated without really understanding why. She hugs me and makes me promise I'll come back tomorrow and bring more of my books. Go home happy, but confused. This is the closest I'll ever come in life to actual bliss. My parents both know there's something up with me, that I'm keeping something secret. They let me keep it. Weeks pass like this. Spend more and more time in the woods. We play and fish and she listens to me read. My parents let me keep my secrets, but they're getting worried. Asking questions, glance at each other at my answers. Day comes when we're reading. Becca shushes me. Somebody's coming. Runs off in the woods before I can say anything. Want to call out for her to come back, but now I can hear someone coming, too. It's Dad. He's smiling, but his eyes aren't. Asks me what I'm up to. No, they don't believe me. Lie anyway. Say I just like to read there. Gathers my stuff, says we're going home. Feel guilty but don't understand why. Feel mad about feeling guilty. Be home. Intervention.webm. They keep telling me it's okay to have imaginary friends. Nothing to be ashamed of. Break and shout that Becca's not imaginary. They ask me who she is. Break and tell them the whole thing. They're visibly concerned. They patiently explain that she can't be real, because there's not another house for nearly 15 miles. Get mad. Storm back in the woods. Shout her name over and over. No answer. Cry. Go home, broken. Go back the next day, bring comic with me. Sit under beechnut, reading it out loud, very out loud. Catch shadow in the tree above me. Look up. Black cat, green eyes. Becca still lives in those woods. She always will. I have encountered lots of shit, mostly having to do with my parents' old house in Georgia. Place had near non-stop haunted shit going on. Living there I became very jaded to weird supernatural shit, and now I just don't care when something turns on or off on its own, or if something moves by itself. Family moves to old house built in 1905-ish in North Georgia. Old farmhouse, but the farming stopped decades ago and woods have grown up all around. Middle of nowhere. I'm alone one Sunday afternoon, family gone shopping, didn't want to go with them. I hear the downstairs door slam shut and someone walking around down there. Totally alone, 13-year-old, no neighbors. This has to be someone breaking and grab baseball bat and wait at the top of the stairs, hearing footsteps march up the century-old hardwood. Nothing is there, but footsteps on the hardwood floor keep on marching past me. It walks around the living room and straight to the front door. Nope the fuck out, run out of the house and remain out in the woods until family gets back. This turned into a very routine thing after a while. Something would open the downstairs door, slam it shut hard, walk across that room, up the stairs and around to the front door and stop there. It was never at the same time either. Sometimes it happened in the afternoon, early morning, middle of the night. And when it was especially annoying, my mom or my sister would yell at it to stop since the wood floor stomping was loud. And most of the time it would. It just quit moving in one spot if one of them yelled to cut it out or quit it. Year later, after that event, older sister had some friends over after school. Horny guy trying to hook up with her and his friend. Everyone is hanging out in the living room chatting. Door to master bedroom just slams shut loudly. Everyone was startled from the noise but not bothered, goes back to chatting. Door starts to open again, no one really notices it, it slams shut again. Now the two guys are scared. Everyone goes back to talking, but they are very uneasy. Minutes later one of them yells "brew" and points at the door. Doorknob is turning slowly. Everyone is dead silent, staring at the door. Door very slowly and quietly starts moving open, only about a foot at the most. Both of them are standing up and staring while terrified. Door slams shut hard again. The two guys scream and run out the front door, and run into the car and speed off like they witnessed a murder. My sister and I were just looking at them like, what, it's a fucking door. Who the hell cares about a fucking door? By that point we were too used to seeing doors open and shut on their own and it never bothered either of us. Loads of stuff happened in the woods too, mostly heard things like music, singing, or people walking around. Almost never saw anything at all. One weird event. We have a swimming pool. Swimming at night, 10-ish, summer after dark. We hear music playing near the lake behind the house, about 150-ish yards away from the house. No lights out there at all, utter darkness. Music sounds like drums, flutes, whistles. We think some hippie group might be out there playing around on our property by the lake. Get shoes on and go out towards the lake. Father grabs gun and flashlight. He has no idea what to expect from this, but there is zero light out there, so it's crazies playing in the dark. We walk for a while, hearing the music only get a little bit closer. By the time we get to the lake, the music is playing behind us. Somehow we passed it without ever getting close to it. Walk back towards house and the music is behind us again near the lake. No one knew what the fuck to do with that. Father just nopes and goes back in the house. There is also what sounded like a raspy-voiced old man who would sing on occasion in the woods, sometimes in the day and sometimes at night. No one knew what the hell was going on with that, but my neighbor who lived about half a mile down the road also occasionally heard him dinging, and she never cared about it since it was just some old man singing. My family has a few spooky stories. Let me know if you guys want some more. First story is from the perspective of my uncle and is about his encounter with what he calls Paley. Uncle, early 20s in the 1960s. Lived with grandparents near a cemetery and park. Work further in town. After work, hang out in local pub before stumbling home. Have to walk past the cemetery to go home. Walk home after a long day at work. Be walking across the road from the cemetery. Suddenly something catches his eye, movement in the cemetery. What appears to be a really tall man standing in the bushes. This man seems to be wearing really black clothes, dark enough to not be able to see if they are actually clothes. Aside from the black torso and lower body, this man's face and hands are super white. My uncle always describes it as fridge white, so bright he couldn't really make out facial features. Think, fuck, I'm gonna be raped by an albino demon/ice addict. Continue walking as calm as possible while shitting in pants, try not to aggravate it. Every step he takes, this thing copies, everything is copied. If he runs, it runs, if he walks, it walks. Turn the corner and head home. Look back, it stopped at the corner and just watches him go into the house. This continues for months, same thing every night. Uncle thinks it's fine, but as soon as it steps to cross the street, he is going to either sprint and hope to outrun it or fight it and probably die. Have a cocky friend, brags at the pub that he could take anyone on, let's call him John. One night John and Uncle are walking home. John doesn't believe the story of Paley. Uncle turns to John and says, "Don't look now," but there he is. John turns slowly and sees Paley staring into his soul. John squeals like a girl and bolts home. Kicks our hat and the nightly ritual continues. Uncle gets a new job and house, so he is away for some time. A few years later, when he goes back to that area, Paley is gone. Never seen it again. This story is from my grandmother. My grandmother was, for the most part, an average Irish Australian, besides from when it came to religion and the paranormal and religion. A good example would be her personal synchronized version of Catholicism and Celtic paganism, but I can get into that later. These stories are from when she was a young mother working in the mills, and they all take place shortly after World War II. Grandma. Around 20, recently married, father forced it after getting pregnant. Walking home from the mills late at night with husband. Come across the local park near the cemetery where Paley would appear some decades later. The park is pitch black, but something demands attention. Something is in the park, moving fast and erratically. Husband notices too, doesn't know what the fuck it is. Pay more attention, it looks like a dog with a sheet thrown over its head, running around wildly to get free. Thing is almost blindingly white and quite fast. Husband urges to leave. The more grandma pays attention, the less it looks like a dog in a sheet. It looks like a person, albino tear white, running on all fours around the park. That would be terrifying in of itself, except there is one detail that makes this worse. It isn't running. In fact, this thing has no visible legs/hands at all. It appears to be floating or gliding across the ground. What the fuck? PNG. At this point, grandma agrees with husband to get the fuck out and they speed walk home, all the time watching this thing in the park. It never stops or even acknowledges their presence. Next story, this time from my great-uncle. He didn't know about the park story and never told ghost stories but told this story in confidence to Grandma. B.Uncle. Taking a stroll at night. Walking is his favorite pastime. Walks past the park, nothing happening, just dark. There is a school opposite of the park. Uncle glances into the school and catches sight of something. Something resembling a huge, albino man was standing on the benches. For reference, schools here have benches where kids will sit outside to eat lunch before playing. Abnormal, but maybe it's just a drunk local. Pub culture is at its peak. Look a little closer, this thing appears to be wearing nothing, but no details can be made out. This thing doesn't move. It looks like it is facing away from Uncle. Uncle tries to study it but only finds it more confusing the more he looks. He notices something. This thing has no feet. Here we go again. Uncle decides to cross the street and watch it as he walks out of sight. He comes to Grandma, tells the story, hand to heart that he would never make something up. Grandma of course thinks of her own and starts thinking something is happening. Grandma's story again. This is her final encounter with whatever the fuck was happening in that area. B. Grandma. Husband left. Got 2 boys to raise. Gotta work hard at the mills to make sure no one goes hungry. Work until late at night. Boys are at home being looked after by great-grandma and great-grandpa. Walk home late at night, not the usual route. Try to steer clear of the park as now it is possibly dangerous. Try to walk along the train tracks behind town to get home. Usually empty, especially at this time. Walking along, lost in thought. Come across a small hill. There is what appears to be a man facing away from her. Grandma always said she thought he was a drunk taking a piss in the bush. She called out asking if he is okay. Train tracks are dangerous when drunk, of course. The man doesn't move but twitches slightly. Grandma takes note of the whiteness of this guy's clothing/skin. Starts feeling a very strong sense of terror. Fight or flight kicks in. Grandma, being an almost 5-foot woman, of course chooses to flee. Sprint downhill. As soon as she turns her back, the thing sprints after her. Oh shit, cunt. Run for what feels like hours. She can hear this thing's loud footsteps right behind her. For the entire ordeal it feels like this thing is 1 inch from grabbing her. Makes it downhill and ducks into the street. Keeps running until she hits home. Looks back and nothing is there. Thanks God/gods that she is alive and prays for protection. Grandma moved to another place shortly after and never witnessed the albino demon again, but her son would see it and dub it Paley a few years after. Grandma suggested it might be all connected, but of course there is no way to prove it. Personally, my theory is that all the stories feature the same entity. What that entity is, I have no fucking clue. Perhaps it was a ghost from the nearby graveyard, a demon, some form of skinwalker or whatever. I don't know, but whatever it was certainly had malicious intent. To add on to this, I should tell a story that a taxi driver told my grandma. He told my grandma to never walk at night in the park cemetery. Be taxi driver. Walk through the park at night. Hear big, heavy footsteps behind. Don't look back, just speed up a little. As he speeds up, so does whatever is behind him. He decides to bolt and this thing fucking bolts after him. A breath away from being snatched by scuffed Bigfoot. This thing sounds huge. Never look back. Get out of the park safety and turn around. Nothing. He tried rationalizing it as maybe a kangaroo, but kangaroos in this area are shit scared of human, non-aggressive and wouldn't be game enough to follow a full-grown man. I think he encountered the same thing as my family members did. At least it proves we just aren't all crazy lol. These aren't my stories, but ones that my little brother told me. He's a Geosciences grad student at the moment. He's been doing field work in Wyoming for about 4 years now, usually in summer. He's seen most of the wildlife there is to see up there, shy of cougars who apparently avoid their camps. He's also seen some weird shit that he couldn't explain. I'm fuzzy on technical details since we're that close, and I've never paid much attention to his studies, so most of the fieldwork stuff he told me is where things get a bit confused. I'll try not to go into any of the jargony stuff he told me since I'm sure I'd get it wrong beyond the basics. Anyway, the stories. Story 1, Day 0. Roughly 2-week undergrad externship program in Wyoming, spans over spring break plus a week. Dave shows up with 2 classmates from his program, Kelly and Junior, meets the other externs. Total of 20 people in this class session. Going to be doing survey work and checking up on geothermal activity or some such. Taking core samples, mapping terrain informations, Doppler readings, all that jazz. Students camping in tents, but there's a trailer to store equipment, a few outbuildings for cooking and showers, and a fence around the compound. Also 2 latrines and a semi-permanent shelter with concrete floor and tables. Rustic, but safe enough. Dave and Junior sharing a really swanky, big tent that got ditched at previous internship by an international student. Common event apparently, since they can't transport them home easily. Kelly plants her single near theirs in the rough circle of tents. Orientation time. Class divided up in 5 groups of 4 and assigned territory and tasks. Dave, Junior and Kelly all in different groups. First night is pretty quiet, but cold as balls, and there's a light dusting of fresh snow the next morning. Day 1-3. Everybody's up before first light to get ready for fieldwork. Groups split up and head off. Each group has a supervisor, and are taken to their specific survey area in a truck by said supervisor. First few days of work goes as planned, no surprises. A bit more snowfall during the first half of the week, but no problem. Day 4. On the 4th morning, while they're eating breakfast, Kelly asks if the boys came and tapped on her tent the night before. Dave and Junior say no, they were wiped and went straight to sleep. Kelly says she woke up with someone tapping at her tent just by her head and whispering her name. By the time she got up and unzipped the flap, they were gone. They decide it must have been one of her group members trying to ask her about the previous day's data, or the next day's work. Who knows, she decides to pursue it later when they go out to work. Day continues again as normal. Nighttime again, Dave and Junior shooting the shit before going to sleep. Hear someone tapping their tent at their feet before they go to sleep. Is anybody there? Hello? From outside the tent, sounds like Kelly. They turn on the lamp, open up the flap, but nobody's there. Figure she went back to her tent, light is on inside. Dave goes and asks her what she wanted. No response, no one inside. Fresh snow again. Footprints leading away from her tent towards the latrines. Dave assumes she just wanted someone to walk over there with her, since it's dark as fuck other than the motion lamps. He shrugs, heads back to his tent and goes to sleep. Day 5-12. Next day, Kelly doesn't join them for breakfast and eats with her survey team instead. Don't get to ask her what she wanted. Dave feels weird all day, and notices that his work team is really jumpy. One of Dave's workmates insists he saw a bear while they were in the field, and they decide that's why everyone is on edge. Some kind of primordial instinct can sense the predator lurking or some shit. Night rolls around again, and Dave and Junior are about to sleep when that tapping comes again. It's really dark, I can see you. Come out. Kelly's voice again. Junior tells her just a second and I'll turn on the lamp. They open the tent, no Kelly. Her tent isn't lit up. Footprints aren't clear because there's been no fresh snow all day. Fuck it, they go and tap on Kelly's tent. Light turns on and she chews them out for waking her up again. Again? Dave apologizes and drags Junior back to their tent. Dave tells Junior about the bear one guy saw at this point. Junior makes jokes about skinwalkers on the mountain, and they both go to sleep feeling a bit on edge. Day 6. Next morning, everyone in camp seems a bit out of it. People talking about the stupid pranks everyone else is pulling, and no one is getting enough sleep. Bear Sighter mentions Dave tapping on his tent. Dave mentions Kelly. two other guys both mention someone else entirely. Almost everyone reports some kind of mysterious nighttime visitor that wasn't there. They're starting to get a bit paranoid and the supervisors tell them to knock it off with the pranks, there's work to be done. The pranks continued for the rest of the trip, but no one was hurt, turned up acting weird, or went missing. People were just jittery and ready to get the fuck out of camp by the end of it all. Summer internship time, sweet. Free day, so Dave and Mo, international student on his first time, go hiking. Pack lunch, Dave's gun, and bear mace. Head out into the woods. Beautiful scenery, fantastic views. They go do their thing and Dave is snapping photos to send his girlfriend back home. Suddenly, Dave notices Mo isn't beside him anymore. They're at the top of a ridge looking into a particularly picturesque valley. Lots of dense trees, not a lot of visibility. Dave doesn't panic, figures Mo had to shit and stepped out of view. Starts calling Mo's name. No answer, just echoes. Oh. Dave doesn't leave the ridge, but starts looking around for any sign of this guy. Nothing in sight, so he keeps calling the guy's name. Eventually he hears 3 blasts from a safety whistle. Oh. Dave starts to backtrack the way they came, figuring that Mo turned around before him and got lost when off their trail. Another 3 blasts, this time louder. Dave keeps following the sound, but there's no Mo. By now, Dave thinks something fucked up is going on, and gets out the bear mace just in case. Apparently contemplated his handgun, but didn't go for it. He stops and waits to see if he hears any more whistles. Sure enough, 3 blasts, practically on top of them. Dave almost jumps out of his skin. Mo comes running down the hill out of nowhere and almost slams into him. Dave is pissed, almost bear maces Mo in the face, demands to know where he went. Mo is equally pissed and demands to know why Dave left him standing on the bridge all alone. They confer and it comes to light that neither of them blew their safety whistle, though they both heard it. Both thought the other had wandered off the ridge and was calling for help. No more whistle blowing follows, no one else from camp was going hiking. Camp is isolated from normal camping areas or parks. Dave and Mo nope the fuck back to camp as fast as they can go, even though they'd planned to be out several more hours. Same summer internship as story above. Hiking with a different intern, Joey. Everything's going good, they're looking for a place to chill out and have lunch. Find a little creek babbling away, only a few feet across and super shallow. Being geology geeks, they start discussing whether this should be on the survey or not. Outside target zone, but still possibly relevant because of water source, etc. After lunch, they pack up and start to head back the way they came towards camp. Except it's not the way back towards camp. It's almost like they found a loop or some shit. Keep ending up back at the creek bed. After about an hour of this, they decide to just follow the creek bed for a while to see if maybe they just turned down the wrong paths. Stop when they find a weird little cairn on an island in the middle of this narrow creek. Geology geeks and rock hounds, so they notice the rocks don't match the area quite right. Pile of big chunks of limestone with a huge green quartz at the base. Deer skull at the top of the pile with the antlers crossed under it. Bleached from exposure, looks brittle and old. Dave says they should go back the way they came, because fuck that ritualistic looking horror movie shit. Joey agrees, but is weirded out mostly by the stones rather than the skull. No proper limestone deposits in the area apparently, and that kind of quartz is only in a specific part of the state. I wouldn't know, just repeating what Dave said here. They go back the way they came and finally get back on their trail properly. Dave tells me he thinks whatever built that pile of rocks, it wanted them to see it before they left. Like it was warning them to stay out of its territory or something. Dave and Joey went hiking another day with Mo, but couldn't find the creek or the cairn a second time. Dave was relieved because he didn't want to go back, but after the first hiking trip, Mo said he was curious. Through stupid circumstances, Dave gets separated from his work crew in the field. Middle of fucking nowhere on the mountain. Realizes he's lost. Fuck shit damn it. has a map and GPS and all the safety gear he should have, but nothing is working quite right. Example, compass is stuck and won't rotate to face magnetic north. GPS claims to have no signal, phone likewise has no signal and went from 80% charge to 5% in about 5 minutes. Fuck this shit, fuck it to hell. Against better judgment, he decides to try to find his way back. Dave tries to backtrack, but can seem to go in a straight line. He finally sits down and considers blasting with his whistle to see if he can get attention from his group. Right as he's about to blow that whistle, a fuck-off huge raven drops down from a tree onto a rock formation a little ways from him. Raven puffs up real big, and flies a few trees off with that croaky cawing noise they make. Dave's impersonation of the sound cannot be described with text, but it's hilarious. Stops, and puffs up again watching him. Dave says he doesn't know why, but he decides to follow the raven. They don't generally come anywhere near people this far out, just garbage if they can get it, so this bird was acting funny. Raven keeps up the leading game, flying a few yards ahead at a time while Dave follows. After about 30 minutes, Dave starts to recognize the terrain. After 45 minutes, he's almost back to the survey site, and the raven is gone. Didn't fly away, just disappeared when he looked away from it for a minute to get his bearings. Most of the other stories he told me weren't supernatural at all, just a bit eerie. He and his work crew ran into a bear face to face during summer once. At a distance of maybe 10 yards. It just looked at them for a few minutes, and went back to rooting around and doing its thing. They also had a pack of wolves show up and check out their perimeter fence another time. Nothing malicious, just curious and probably had smelled food or the like. They didn't come back. He had a couple of other spooky stories that were pretty bland. Things like his team encountering a guy in the woods where there were no habitations. And he wasn't carrying gear like a camper or hiker either. He looked a bit like a farmer who'd just strolled out of his field instead of a dense tree line. There was also a guy who got attacked in a lake while everyone was fishing. They decided to take a break, so he went for a swim. Had a huge row of bite marks in his leg, but they couldn't say what it was that did it. Eventually put it down to some kind of introduced garfish and called it good. Nobody went swimming for the rest of that trip, though. Hello/X/. This is a very long story that I have wanted to share for a long time, and just now I have finally decided to post this, and while it isn't my first post, it is my first thread. What I am going to tell you is a 100% true to the best of my memory, a real Inuits with no skinwalkers. Interested? Good. Some background about me. First, I am a skeptic, and have been called every foul name under the sun, but I'm not here for debunking, I am here because of my true love, that of mysteries. I do now, and always have loved science and history, because of all the mysteries involved. Somewhat paradoxically, what really rustles my jimmies, though, is the paranormal. Ghosts, cryptids, aliens, monsters of all types will get me going instantly, and a well-written or otherwise convincing creepypasta will have me on Google Maps for hours looking for the locations described, looking for police reports, everything. Hell, I even looked for Mowgli's palace for 3 hours, sad, pathetic fag I am. Second, I love the outdoors, the woods in particular, was in Scouts whenever I could be, used to sleep in a tent in the backyard during the summer. I took every chance I could to go hiking, backpacking, mountain biking, or even just camping, everywhere I could. I was hiking as early as I can remember, and only don't now because of a permanent injury from mountain biking. I was, and am, very experienced in the woods. Even though I was 12 when this event happened, I had still been hiking and camping since I was 3. This experience, combined with my skepticism, leads to me being very level-headed in the woods, but what I saw I still have no explanation for, apart from a false memory. Some notes about the thread. I'm not posting for people to dump stories, unless they're OC, please. I know /x/ is not /b/, so I'm asking politely. I'm using a secure trip code, because I invite any questions, clarifications, etc., and really don't want to be impersonated. Obviously all names are changed, but I will give you the real location and the year. I'm not green texting, because there are a lot of details I don't want to leave out, and structuring it that way will take longer than just writing it out. Finally, this is all pre-written, so expect quick posts, and me not asking to continue. I know, you're devastated. Now that everything is enumerated like that, onto my experience. In 2003, I, along with my scoutmasters, decided to put our scout troop through some extreme camping. This actually was decided in October 2002, but the date set was around January 20, 2003. We were from, and camping in, the Finger Lakes region, and during the winter months, especially January and February, anyone from the region will tell you about the brutal weather we get. Lake-effect blizzards, huge windstorms, and sleet make the winters in this area unpleasant. This was especially true of the weekend set, months in advance, for the trip. The high for the trip was around -5, and with wind chill we were experiencing anything from -10 to around -25. The campground where we traditionally took our only fall/winter camping trip was a Girl Scout summer camp called Bayberry, but we as Boy Scouts were allowed to camp there when it was otherwise empty. Because of the snow, we couldn't get to the camp we usually used, so we settled for a more accessible camp, and got to work setting up. We noticed that there was no firewood there, which was odd, because they usually gave us at least a little bit, but we wrote this off as having to change our camp. In this camp, there were 4 large A-frame buildings, each with a tarp covering 2 doors reed, holes in the wall on each end, arranged along the compass directions, each about 20 feet from a central fire pit, giving us plenty of room to cook, stack firewood, and hang out. Now, in our group was me, the senior patrol leader, or SPL, 3 other members of my patrol who weren't too pussy to come, we'll call them Tom, Rod, and Tony, and 2 scoutmasters, my dad, and one we'll call Jack. Tom was the annoying kid, extremely racist, sexist, and practically worshipped Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck. Rod was a decent kid, newer, liked talking, and eventually had a good sense of humor, when he finally pulled the stick out of his ass. Tony was the newest guy. He had joined the troop only about 2 weeks prior, and as SPL, I was teaching him at nearly all times. He was nice, and a quick learner with a great sense of humor, but was almost cripplingly shy. Dad was along because he loved the outdoors, and really wanted a chance to bond with me. Not getting into my early childhood here, it's irrelevant, and 4chan is not my goddamn diary. Finally Jack, who was the most experienced scoutmaster. He was 3/4 of some Native American tribe, and the other 1/4 was from another. He was a big-time survivalist, and was absolutely fearless in the woods. After we had moved our shit into the building, I took Tony with me as the light was beginning to dim, my hatchet, and we went to collect some firewood for at least the night. We found a couple of smaller diameter fallen trees, and we set to work chopping and stacking it. We got back into camp just before night set in. If you've never been camping in the dead of winter, it is a unique experience. For one, the sounds of bugs that we normally associate with camping is, for obvious reasons, non-existent. This leads to the woods being dead silent, which is eerie to begin with. On top of that, at least in the Finger Lakes, it seems to be even odds whether you get a clear night, where even the stars are so bright you can see your way, or with dense cloud cover, which kills nearly all light, causing the night to become inky black. Thankfully, that night was mostly the former, but with just enough in the way of clouds to make it hard to see too much further out than 15 feet or so. In no time, we had a nice, bright crackling fire, and were cooking dinner on the heavy iron grate that swung to cover a little part of the fire pit, hard to describe if you've never seen a fire pit, and fuck drawing it. We stayed up well into the night, telling stories. Jack and my dad were talking about snowmobiles, we were listening sometimes and other times having side conversations. A couple of times while we were talking, we thought we heard someone in the woods. We figured it was a ranger making sure we were okay. When no ranger appeared, we just assumed the sounds were coming from branches being shaken loose in the intermittent 20 miles per hour gusts. The sounds were too sporadic and slow-moving to be an animal. Finally Jack looked at his cell phone, and called lights out at around 11 p.m. I have to note, it was a very strict rule, that both myself and the Scoutmasters had agreed upon and implemented, that the only electronic devices allowed was Jack, or another Scoutmaster was allowed to have a single cell phone for timekeeping and emergencies. I shepherded the other scouts into the building, showed them how to add the extra insulation to their sleeping bags. I had them all bring a blanket and an emergency blanket, the ones that look like a huge sheet of tin foil, told them not to sleep in too much clothes because they would actually be colder, etc. We all settled down, but an hour later, I realized I can't sleep, which was odd, as I was warm and comfortable. For some reason, though, I just couldn't sleep. I took one of my privileges as SPL and decided to walk to the latrine, and stoke up the fire and hang out for a little while. I figured if I just hung out by the fire and let my thoughts carry me away for a while, I would be able to sleep. A couple of minutes after I had taken my leak, however, the rest of the troop came out. Apparently nobody could sleep. We all talked, loudly telling stories as young boys do. As we did, I kept hearing the noises, but closer this time. As I didn't think it was anything serious, I didn't mention it to the scouts, but I began scanning the woods every now and then. Every so often, just at the edge of what I could see clearly, I would see a figure running through the woods. It was larger, but I wrote it off as a hungry deer, fairly common in the dead of winter, especially at night. Eventually, from the Scoutmaster building, Jack hollered at us, "You guys need to shut the fuck up. We've got shit to do in the morning." When Rod complained about being hungry, Jack tossed a dozen apples out, one by one. I went back to the side of the building where I had left 6 long, straight sticks I picked up when we were gathering firewood. I brought them back and whittled them to a sharp point with my back knife, handing them to the other 3 scouts, and we all skewered an apple and roasted it over our fire. We kept talking, laughing, and joking, when suddenly, Rod sat next to me. I normally prefer to never sit next to people, and Rod knew this, since we actually knew each other outside of Scouts. He taps me on the knee, and leans over. In a very low voice, he tells me to look slowly at an area, just inside where I could clearly see. I have very good night vision, I feel I should add. All those years of camping had developed my night vision, and Rod was similarly experienced. Thankfully, the other 2 were practically night blind, because when I looked up, I got a slightly better look at what I had been seeing and hearing all night. It was definitely not a deer. It was still too far to make out any real features, but it was definitely humanoid, albeit thin. They seemed to be looking toward our camp, and after a couple of seconds, they retreated back into the murky forest. I still wasn't really worried, probably some kids from the surrounding areas bored. Still, I was cautious, and I started convincing the others to head to bed. I considered telling Dad and Jack about the person, but I figured they'd just be annoyed at me since whoever was in the woods was gone. Soon, with Rod's help, I got the others into the building, but I was not satisfied that whoever was in the woods was gone, and I was not going to take chances with the safety of my troop, even if I thought it to be just a formality. I sat down, pulled my chair around, so that the building my troop was in was to my left, the Scoutmasters to my back, and empty buildings to my front and right. I put a couple good-sized chunks of wood on the fire, put my feet up, resting my boots on the iron ring of the fire pit. For a little while, nothing happened, and I figured I would go back in soon. Suddenly I hear a sound to my left. I don't recall what it was, I just heard that it was closer than any sound yet. I unclipped my buck knife from my belt. I turn to my left. I see it immediately, and while it is closer, and I get a better look at it, it was hiding behind the vacant building to my right. It is crouching, half hidden behind the building, and this time I was certain of 2 things. 1, it was definitely not human. While any real details still escape me, I can notice 3 things. First, it had gray skin. When I saw it earlier, I hadn't taken note of its skin color, because it was still too far to see well, but this time I saw the light from the fire dancing across its clammy gray skin. It was also hairless as far as I could tell. The second thing was that it was naked. On a night this cold, later that week I looked back at the temperature. With wine chill it was -25, naked was a big deal. I love cold temperatures, I'm weird like that. I am comfortable in shorts and a t-shirt in 30-degree weather, but even I was very cold in all of that, and I was bundled up. As disturbing as this was, however, the third thing I noticed was far more disturbing. It was staring right at me. As I look over, I make eye contact with it, and it slings the rest of the way behind the building. At this point, I am scared. I have a war in my mind about what to do. Do I scream and wake everyone up? No, there is no way that ends well. Either it vanishes, I look like I've lost my mind, and lost the respect within the troop that I had worked so hard to get, or it attacks, and kills everyone. Yes, my stupid teenage mind thought somehow I could stop it killing everyone. Problem is I'm terrified. What I decide to do is pretend to sleep. I unzip my coat, and pull my head in, and zip it back up. If you have ever done this, it also lets you peek out of the neck hole. All you need to do is move your shoulders. Soon after, I begin to hear slow, light footsteps, coming from in front of me, and close. I grip, and half open my knife. I angle my shoulders until I get a clear look directly in front of me. What I saw has haunted me until today, and likely will until the end of my life. It was humanoid, with a normal-sized head, but that was as close as the word normal gets to what was in front of me. It was just on the other side of the fire pit, around 5 feet away. It was standing upright. I would estimate it was between 7 and 8 feet tall, and while very skinny, I would not go so far as emaciated, more stretched. Its limbs were very long and thin. The way it walked was almost spider-like, if that makes any sense. Its hips didn't seem to move as it did, only its knees. Its skin was gray, as I had noticed before, but it was lightly mottled. Its eyes were sunken, huge, and jet black. They were also very reflective. In my fear-addled mind, it seemed almost like they were strobe lights. As the fire danced, its eyes would catch more and less light, shining it back into mine. It moved its head oddly as it came closer, tipping it from side to side, front to back. All through this though, it looked like it never broke eye contact with me. I could be sure though, because its eyes were so dark. Its mouth was closed, with lips so thin they don't even really qualify as lips. Its steps were light, and then it stopped as it came to the fire pit. I am terrified at this point, and slowly rotate my shoulders so that the neck hole pointed up. I could still see the top of its head, it was standing so close to me. Then I heard more footsteps, and my blood turned to ice. I was literally scared stiff. It sounded like it was on all fours, and I was silently reassuring myself it was a deer, until I felt the poking at my arm. It felt just like a person jabbing my arm with their index finger, hard, but it felt like the finger was trembling. While I'm writing this, I can't for the life of me even describe it. Almost like I was being poked that hard by someone with Parkinson's level hand tremors. Then it stopped, and it seemed like they became excited, because they started moving a lot more. I don't know if more joined in, but there was a lot more motion around me. They seemed to be consciously avoiding my neck hole, so I think they knew I was awake. I couldn't move anyway, I was beyond terrified. The last thing I remember was one of them grabbing my leg. It seized my calf tightly, but not roughly. It moved my leg around, all over the place, bending my knees, and at this point I have no problem admitting that I fainted. It was too much. When I woke up, I was up before the rest. I woke up because my foot was very hot. I got up, and pulled my foot out of the fire pit. This was the foot that creature had been moving. When I put the fire out, I looked around on the ground. At this point, Jack came out of his building. I saw the footprints, and started to carefully obliterate them in such a way that I wouldn't arouse Jack's suspicion. He went around to a nearby pavilion with a propane grill to start on breakfast. I woke up the other scouts. As they got dressed, I heard Tony start getting more and more annoyed, and suddenly he was shouting at the other two scouts. Jack gave me an exasperated look, and I went to go resolve it so he could keep cooking. I went into the building, and Tony was freaking out. I got everyone calmed down, and Tony informed me that his boots had gone missing. I explained to him that the other scouts wouldn't have stolen them. We looked, and sure enough, they were nowhere to be found in the building. Thankfully, another scout had packed a spare pair of hiking boots, which weren't ideal, but they were waterproof and warm. I just had him tuck his pants into the boots. Almost nothing of note for the story happened that day. The only thing was the log we had cut for firewood the day before was gone, and we had left half of it there. We found another log and cut wood. The next night, it seemed like everything was quiet. No noises around the camp, no movement, nothing. It was, however, a very dark night, and there was a light snowstorm. The light from the fire was almost the only source of light. We went to bed earlier that night, around 10. I slept very well that night, until Jack and my dad woke me up at around 5 a.m. At some point in the night, the bottom of Tony's sleeping bag was drenched. He was suffering from hypothermia, and was warming up near a heater in the Scoutmaster's building. Jack pulled me outside, and asked if I had seen anything happen that night. I told him no, and he started to say that his feet and socks must have been wet or something. I stopped him and told him about what had happened the night before. His eyes went wide, and he looked at me until I had finished telling him what had happened. It took him a minute to compose himself, and when he did, he spoke in a quiet tone, and I could hear terror in his voice. "Anon, we are leaving. Go back into the A-frame. Tell the other scouts to pack up. Sun will be up in about 45 minutes. Please pack up Tony's gear." As we walked back toward the fire pit, I noticed something that was not there when I went to bed. There, burning in the pit, was Tony's boots. They couldn't have been in the pit for more than 2 hours, they were only about halfway burned. Jack saw this and got back to the building to help finish getting Tony stable and warm. We left Bayberry as soon as we could, one day earlier than intended. I haven't been back in the woods by myself since that day. Anyone who can tell me more is very appreciated. I have kept this largely to myself for this entire time. As a final note, I mentioned that I'm a skeptic, but I always come to stories like this with an open mind, as I mentioned before. I'll ask if the same courtesy. Thank you, /x/. Hey, /x. I'm not from here. I'm a mutant who only comes here for the occasional creepypasta thread. I'm not too into the paranormal and have never believed in ghosts or aliens or any of that sort of stuff. I live in Oak Park, just outside of Chicago, Illinois. See, we have an ordinance here where you're not allowed to put up a for sale sign in front of a house. So many homes are vacant here that they'd be absolutely everywhere if we could put them up. So in order to ensure people want to live here, we make it so it doesn't look like nobody wants to live here, thus, no for sale signs. I live alone with my pet cat, an all-black cat which I found out recently is a rarity. His name is Calvin. He was the run of the litter. This isn't really important. The story all started about 2 months ago. That's when I first got up late at night after a bad dream and went out for a cigarette and saw my neighbor from directly across the street. He was sitting in front of his large, bright television, which was facing right out his window at my house. I did not think anything of it. As days went on, I kept looking out my window and seeing my neighbor just sitting there watching TV. After 2 weeks I came to the conclusion that he could very well be dead. It just didn't make sense that he was just sitting there, TV on, not leaving the couch for weeks. I could only see the back of his head, and he very well may have moved while I was at work. But knowing it was there, the light of his television kept me up at night, and for hours on end there would just be no movement. I came to the conclusion that I should call the police to ask if they could check up on my neighbor. I didn't know him very well, we met twice. He was an older guy. I used to see him shoveling the snow or raking leaves and I'd offer to help and he said no both times. He was a fairly active guy for his age and it didn't add up that he'd just sit there for days watching TV and not leaving his house. So I called the police and told them and they offered to check it out. I saw them pull up and couldn't help but watch. I was very curious and even though I thought all that would happen was they'd call up an ambulance or something and remove my neighbor's dead body, not something I'd usually be interested in watching. I had grown so curious about what was going on over there that I couldn't settle for the simple answer that my neighbor simply died in front of his television. After knocking a few times, I saw them open up the front door and walk in. They looked around, one of them left the living room so I couldn't see where he'd gone, I could only see the one room where my neighbor's window was. The one officer turned off the television and also left my sight. They both left and drove off. About 20 minutes later I got a call explaining that the house was empty and my neighbor had moved out. They said a real estate agent probably left the television on. I went onto a few real estate websites and, as it were, the house was indeed for sale. Anticlimactic, but at least it was far less morbid conclusion than I'd expected. I was sort of embarrassed that my mind had immediately gone to death when it really was so bland and simple. And I felt like a pretty bad person for actually feeling a slight sense of disappointment when I found out my neighbor hadn't died as I'd assumed. That was a reasonable answer, a totally logical one. I had no way of knowing without the real estate signs up front and I had no reason to question it. My neighbor had moved out. Plain and simple. When I went to bed that night, it had pretty much entirely left my head. My bedroom window faces out towards my neighbor's house. For the last 2 weeks I had been watching the television from my bed. It was how I went to sleep, just confusedly staring in wonder, slightly disturbed knowing I could be looking at the back of the head of my dead neighbor. And since I had been staring at that television for the last 2 weeks, it took a few minutes to register the horror when I crawled into bed and looked at the television, still on, across the street. I didn't sleep very well. Every night, for about a month and a half I'd just see television. During the day, it was on. I'd walk up to the house if I was feeling more adventurous and knock on the door, but nobody answered. I started smoking quite a bit in lieu of proper sleep. Every night I'd walk by the house, curious, scared and confused. I contacted the realtor and asked if they were giving tours and she said they were not. So it didn't get turned on during some open house. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, that the television was never on, but the officer definitely went over there and turned it off. So it had been on, at least in the first place. I invited a friend over 2 weeks ago and after a little hanging out I told him the story and asked, straight-faced and horrified, if the television was on. He said it was. He was clearly concerned for my health and I don't blame him. So the only other option I could think of was that maybe a squatter had taken up residence here. It wasn't common in our area, as far as I knew. There was very little crime or homelessness in the suburban area I live in, so it didn't really make sense for somebody to squat here, but it was all I could think of. Last night I worked up the courage to confront the squatter. I was going to call the police, but assuming the squatter had been there when I first called, I doubted it would do anything to tell them again. I worked it out in my head that as long as somebody else was living in that house illegally, it wasn't so bad for me to walk over and enter uninvited myself. Stupidly, I worked up this courage while smoking a cigarette late at night, where the only light out was the light pollution over to the east in Chicago and the dim light of the street lamps. Shaking both from the terrible cold weather we've been having lately and from the nervousness taking over, I opened the door. I was hoping the door was locked so I could back down my sudden wave of courage and walk away without feeling like I was just running off with my tail between my legs. To my surprise and dismay, the door was not locked. I felt briefly confused, wondering why the realtor hadn't put in a lock like they did when I sold my house. But I realized that if there was somebody squatting here, then it shouldn't come as a surprise that there was exactly airtight security. Slowly, timidly I walked towards the living room. I could hear faint murmur of infomercials and see the moving lights and colors of the screens shine as I tiptoed, trying to make as little noise as possible. My whole body went cold as I entered the room. There was my squatter, a middle-aged woman, wrinkly, gray-haired and dressed like a homeless person. It was at least added up. I was more horrified of the fact that I had to now confront them than at the woman herself. I stuttered a scared hello and she looked at me, and before I could form a thought, she screamed the most hellish, horrifying scream I've ever heard. It was not the scream of a middle-aged woman, it was demonic, deep and ear-splitting. I froze up and my heart sank and my eyes widened and I stared. Accepting that I was going to die at the screaming woman which seemed like an eternity. It was an unwavering scream, it didn't sound like she was losing her breath after what had been a whole minute. The moment the initial wave of shock wore off, I just turned and ran. She hadn't moved save for turning to look at me. She screamed. And I looked to make sure she hadn't gotten up to follow me out, and she had not. I ran to my house. I considered calling the police, but I didn't want to explain the situation or risk getting myself into legal trouble for trespassing on my neighbor's property, and if they went there and again did not find the squatters, there was no question that I'd be seen as completely insane. I lay awake, refusing to look across the street at the television screen, and my thoughts raced. Surely it had to have just been a squatter. She looked like one. She was clearly living in a house that wasn't hers. She was probably a mentally unstable homeless woman. I decided the scream couldn't have been as awful as I had thought. It was all just the makings of a scared mind. I actually managed to sleep, shockingly enough, and when I woke up I briefly didn't even remember what had happened the night before. What I woke up to was somewhat odd. My cat always sleeps downstairs in the living room on the sofa, but I found him, wide awake, sitting on my bed cleaning himself. In all my years living here, I never woke up with him in my room. I pet him for a little while and went downstairs. As I began remembering the events of the previous night, I decided to go out for a cigarette, and on my way out I found that my front door had been unlocked. I ran through last night in my head and I remembered vividly, my frantic run home ending in me making sure all my doors were locked. My memory is very rarely faulty. I felt my stomach churn and my heart sink, and I felt a chill as I walked back upstairs to go to my living room. What I found would have been entirely mundane in any other setting. My television set was on. I called the police to explain the situation. I called out of work and am spending the next few days in my friend's home with my laptop and my cat. Mining settlements. I will give a quick overview of the scope of space mining-driven advancements, a history, and then go into detail as well as give some anecdotes, in the next several posts. An unknown amount of objects and interplanetary locations are currently inhabited by mining operations and outposts. Space exploration in recent decades has become an independent industry as certain early locations became stable and habitable and reached material and financial autonomy. On these locations, research and scientific development were able to progress faster than their predecessors on Earth and achieve technological advancement more developed than Earth. Reasons for these developments happening in off-Earth settlements can be ascribed to a different paradigm, ethics and resources. Earth Command has been suspended due to the fact they lost leverage, but despite this, off-Earth settlements maintain a deeply rooted diplomatic relationship with Earth intelligences, in order to trade, share information, and overcome mutual challenges. On Earth, only a very select group of people are aware of the true advancement of humanity, and the thousands of off-Earth residents currently living in settlements. It is their job to maintain contact, and in some cases, travel to off-world settlements on a diplomatic mission. These trips are considered a life-altering experience for obvious reasons. Communications with Earth from settlements is also limited to officials and centralized. Between settlements, communication is more free and less formal, as basic infrastructure keeps their civilization going. The most interesting difference between Earth citizens and known settlements is their hierarchy. Since every settler has a task, they are classically born with less freedom and more duty than as though they would have had if they were born on Earth. These social structures would be considered slavery in Earth terms, but the most notable feature of this hierarchy is their dedicated regimen according to their assigned task. Many of them have underwent a rigid transformation from birth to enable them to become more suitable for a job. It can be said that the more specialized a certain function, the more extensively the subject has underwent programming, resulting in notable physical differences and abilities. I will detail more about this later. The techniques and principles these settlements were built on, all had origins on Earth and were founded by Earth missionaries, but have long been perfected and outmatched by the resulting proficiency and prowess of mining companies. Many mining companies build a limited abode on the surface of an object to place an observatory, communications center, dock, command center and some residence for central command and visitors. Most of the activity happens below ground where aside from mining, workers live, laboratories are outfitted, experiments and research is conducted and a whole ecosystem to support a settlement exists. Planetary locations can be more versatile for different purposes, such as weapon testing, aviation, or research dedicated to planetary exploitation, including potentially terraformation. Larger bases can also be used for breeding programs and can have a primarily societal characteristic, housing many citizens, though arranged according to the needs of a company. Nothing compared to Earth, as their lives are dictated by central command and in many cases they are an export product to be delivered to other missions. Off-world advancement has made Earth-based space exploration initiative, apart from regular close orbit activity, obsolete. This includes defense operations, entrepreneurial missions, communication and intelligence systems, as they are all related to Earth science, politics and economy. Space mining is a peaceful capitalistic endeavor where companies are able to compete, but in reality they mostly keep to themselves as there are objects plenty to mine and hostility is bad for business. It's an open secret that they spy on each other and there have been accounts of alleged sabotage but no major conflict or signs of overt hostility. The most powerful mining companies are actively communicating with Earth intelligence as they trade technology, resources and intelligence, but companies are neutral to Earth politics, and they like to maintain their position as frontrunners so they don't share their most potent and dangerous technology. Whatever deal is made is in mutual interest as to ensure a linear development on Earth, as our means of travel and communication to them is outdated. They monitor us closely and at all times keep a presence ready within reach, on a nearby outpost, in orbit, or on Earth. The only time to interfere is to avert cataclysmic disaster or threats to their infrastructure. During the days of cessation, direct efforts had to be taken to prove their capability to Earth command. But for several generations now, a new balance between Earth and extraterrestrial civilization has been found in which trust and loyalty have been instrumental, despite Earth being out of the lead and left to their devices. Going into detail. Some interesting things that can be found in a human space settlements. First thing that will amaze you are the overall architecture, infrastructure, and technology if you were to arrive to a Class A settlement as an Earth diplomat, and the nonchalance of settlers that operate in this world naturally. And also, the views. When you meet High Command, you are given a tour of the facility. A standard Class A settlement will have a dome embedded in the object being mined, that gives a view of the sky above, as well as the vast scale of the operations inside, as this is the area that different departments come together. Data center, command, in and outgoing traffic. This is the beating heart of the company and the pride of the settlement. It will become apparent, the different breeds of settlers performing their assigned task. Most notable at first sight is the data center. A small glass structure with several floors facilitates highly capable administrators, seemingly embedded into the infrastructure, seated on rail pods that allows them to operate the data center, as they interact with the operating system, the artificial intelligence that runs the facility. This building is a computer, manned by more than human, hyper-intelligent operators, capable of memorizing vast sequences of code, with such enhanced cranial properties they cannot live without support outside of this environment. They have no identity, they are not functionally human. They exist to support a computer system, analyzing data, calculating risk assessment, double-checking, troubleshooting. They might eventually not recognize a human being as their integration progresses, as social interaction for these operatives is limited from birth, and even their development significantly automated. Military personnel is not often trained on a typical mining location, but there are some stationed. Their most impressive feats are seen in action, as they pilot advanced machines no ordinary human pilot is capable of learning. The pilot breed undergoes a similar programming as the data operative, as they are also required to process complex information fast. However, they are more physically autonomous, are in fact athletic, and could also be deployed for other tasks and vehicles. An impressive display of action is rarely seen for diplomats, as crises are rare and rarely need deployment. One of the more impressive vehicles is the Colibri, a new small lightweight vessel for one man, that can make rapid maneuver changes such as stopping, accelerating, ascending/descending, taking turns, fly at high speeds, and access difficult terrain such as a crater, crevasse, or structure. This vehicle is suitable for crisis response, scouting, and stalking, is suitable for the vacuum of space as well as atmospheric flight, and has been equipped on Earth as well, and is able to enter and leave the atmosphere in flight. The technology is not understood by Earth scientists and could not be manned by Earth military personnel, as no Earth citizen can process the reaction times required to pilot an aircraft capable of such speed and maneuvers. It has a cockpit and several wings that can be adjusted in flight to perform certain movements or to form a certain profile. It can appear to look like a dart, a star, a disc, or the more conventional triangle. Notably, the line of aircraft this was part of was based on Earth technology, as the foundation of Earth aviation continued to be instrumental for current military development. However, to most Earth observers, this craft would be unrecognizable as it outmatches their understanding of military aviation in every regard. It is reported to make a distinct metallic rattle or whiz as its lightweight appendices carry it through the air, giving its unique characteristics the nickname of the colibri, or hummingbird. A recent crisis has caused a Class A mining operation to be in jeopardy as a violent disease surfaced from beneath the facility, that went undetected as the data center was believed to be compromised, allowing the spread to be rampant across the facility until it reached upper levels, causing High Command to initiate quarantine protocol and prompted the arrival of a colibri and a subsequent evacuation of present Earth diplomat as well as High Command. Majority of assets at point of extraction had been lost to the affliction, which attacks and hijacks neural networks, spreads through contact and causes excited delirium, inhibits impulse control and causes explosive, rabid behavior with a fixation on organisms lacking a pheromone that is expelled in infected organisms. Scientific efforts are made to breed immunity in order to successfully research the component found in several mining operations that caused multiple reports of outbreak-related malfunction. Earth population rumored to be designated test group to attempt herd immunity.
Bump. I need more OP. Can you describe some of the other breeds and their physical characteristics?
High Command are the class that carry the self-assigned responsibility of human genetic purity. They practice eugenics to a high standard, and are all-round fit, intelligent, and have excellent discipline and work ethic. Their average skill sheet outmatches what is rarely seen naturally on Earth and would be considered exceptional to us. They could compete in Olympics and high-level chess competitions with fair ease. A stark contrast with miners who are selected for brute strength and only the necessary intelligence to follow orders and perform simple tasks. Consider the work ethics of Chinese with the physical strength of Africans. They work hard.
That's dope. What happens when one of the assigned classes want more out of life? Have there been organized revolts consisting of multiple or single worker classes?
No such reports are known, and it is unthinkable given the structural organization of these settlements. The settlers lack incentive for revolts. A miner is a miner. He is not a dreamer. If he dreams of mining more than he had the day before. There are no stars for him to see. No world above. No question of authority. These systems are fail-safe as long as the integrity of command is intact. The power that comes with the programming techniques that enable the programmer to create a physiological slave could spell disaster in the wrong hands. So far, everything points towards these systems being put towards their own progression. The same goes for these indoctrination methods and breaking of the will as with aviation. The basis was laid on Earth, and this too is being done by intelligences. They don't just hire geniuses, they make them. It's pretty old stuff.
Especially amongst a lethal disease, I'd imagine shit would get chaotic and unpredictable very fast. What happens when a mining settlement breaks down into unmitigated chaos?
A normal response is containment, decontamination, and evacuation, with minimal loss of assets, and in some cases continued operations if the company feels safe doing so or can afford to sacrifice some workers.
How many companies are there?
Less than a dozen. A company can own several installations.
Are each company different in their ethical treatment of worker classes, professional hierarchies, etc., or do all of them follow the same template of operations, so to speak?
There are differences in terms of which direction they take as a society, since a company isn't just a company, they are a human experiment following a certain path, with their own choices, developments and techniques. The ones conducting business with Earth are considered Class A companies. Earth intelligences are incapable of tracking all activity and development. We have to trust Class A relations data and what corresponds with our own findings. Models predict Class A loyalty to Earth in case of conflict with other off-Earth settlements. We are given just enough to defend ourselves but not to overtake their capability. Class A civilizations keep us down intentionally as to protect their own economy and off-world relations. If the balance is lost, rogue civilizations might just want to commit piracy, hijack a couple installations, or put their claims on Earth soil, in which case they need to overthrow our governments and subject humanity to brutal slavery, and they can.
Since when has this been going on, and what moons, planets, asteroids, etc. have colonies?
The basis for these settlements have been laid on Earth over the past 100 years, from aviation to mass psychology. These things were invented on Earth. World War II kicked off space travel. In the 50s they started sending people up. The astronauts on TV weren't the first. Many test runs were made and a small base on the moon was present. The TV show was for propaganda purposes. Quickly programs were developed to facilitate complete off-world communities as it would be more profitable. If these things weren't done in secret, everyone and his mom would be in the space mining industry, and it would be a giant mess.
Found any extraterrestrial life form on any?
There are reports of life with extraterrestrial origin, but nothing more advanced than ourselves. A big problem is running into frozen ancient pathogens because it can shut down an operation.
This sounds pretty cool but also pretty retarded. What stops one of these engineered beings from trying to take over? Did they somehow find a way to breed out the human capacity for rebellion?
Genetic engineering and indoctrination. The miners don't know shit. Also, why over-specialize for different roles? For efficiency. Doesn't that breed in weakness, considering if there is a failure you can't just swap in a new recruit? They come in batches. You'd have to have a reserve of similarly trained beings. That doesn't seem economical, especially considering the limitations of resources on other worlds. Unless that was all a lie and there is actually water and atmosphere out there. They don't settle on lumps of dust. Here's the current situation. Either we concede with our Class A superiors and they get to lay claim on Earth soil and subject us to their command. In return we get protection, advancement and a place in the interplanetary economy. It can put Earth back on track. Or we allow for current affairs to continue at risk of any other company taking advantage of our vulnerability, with no guarantee of safety or progress. Currently talks are held with global intelligences to discuss our shared position in interplanetary affairs and where our future lies. It looks like many voices are in favor of conceding with our Class A superiors. However, not everyone is aware the sacrifice that has to be made in order to take that step, as 99% of humanity is unfit to be included in their society. We're a stagnant species anyways. Our progress works like this already. Most people just eat, sleep and work while a few super geniuses revolutionize the planet. Regular people to genius are what smartphones are to tin cans and fishing line in a tree fort. The only issue is that every class you've mentioned sucks hard cock. I don't wanna be some shit fuck miner, some Inhuman algorithm sorter, etc. It seems like this is really some capitalist dystopia where only the elites are even allowed to have free will. A good portion of people are normal scientists, builders, teachers. Aside from eugenic enhancements, no major procedure is necessary to tweak their abilities for these key roles. There will always be some selection and indoctrination, but that's also true for anyone on Earth. The difference is we are not the frontrunners and our ways have become outdated, obsolete, dysfunctional. Every space settler is a descendant from the most capable scientist, astronaut and military personnel that the best economies at the times could produce. They have evolved. It's not going to be a question of what if they begin to decide our fate for us, but when. As a diplomat, my role in our future can be decisive, and I am not opposed to pruning the genetic waste in order to transform Earth into an interplanetary hub. Perhaps our influence as Earthlings will introduce more freedom, more secularism. We are already a market anyways through diplomatic relations. It's unthinkable to expose the masses of poor, uneducated, frustrated, tribal humanities to the structures of organization and technology applied in space. Chaos would ensue and abuse of technology would quickly throw the world into disarray, negatively impacting our chances in the interplanetary community and pose a safety risk to outer space settlements. You don't want to give a bunch of nukes to chimpanzees. Space exploration requires a strong sense of responsibility in order to be successful. The power the average space traveler has can't be trusted to the average Earthling. Not in a 100 years of indoctrination or eugenics. Most human breeds are simply unfit. We're locked up on prison Earth with our primitive counterparts for our own safety with outdated technology. You don't know any better. This is your home, this is your life. But in reality it's primitive and poorly developed. Earth science is restricted by morals, dominated by politics and usurped by corporations. The real change was happening in space.
Can you please tell us more about interesting, unusual, or otherwise relevant information or findings about certain places in the solar system, such as Europa, Titan, Mars, or Enceladus, if you have actually explored or established colonies in those worlds?
The Moon has an outpost where most Earth/off-Earth meetings takes place, since it is close, not intimidating to Earth residents, and provides plenty of space to demonstrate new weapons tech. The asteroid belt has several Class A installations, as most installations in our solar system are owned by Class A mining, meaning directly descending from past Earth initiative. When you go farther out, independent and rogue companies operate in their own regions. They are mostly confined to the Oort cloud. I've seen the Moon, most recently an installation in the asteroid belt. They probe objects and test for density and material. When a site is suitable, station modules are shipped and attached to the surface, after which operations can begin fairly quickly. Within a year an object can house up to 100 settlers in a protected, self-sustained environment. I only have estimates as to the spread and amount of objects being mined and how many people live off Earth. I haven't seen it, but I heard Mars has a greenhouse colony in a ravine, they call it the Trench, where they are reviving indigenous fauna spores and seeds for terraforming solutions. They compare the material to prehistoric Earth plant life, but it may be due to the fact those samples are more resilient and durable and more suitable for long periods of hibernation.
The Oort cloud. How long does a spaceship take to travel from, say, the Moon all the way out to the Oort cloud? Anything interesting going on in the Kuiper belt and worlds like Pluto, Eris, and other trans-Neptunian planetoids? I also find it kind of odd they genetically engineer humans for mining operations as opposed to simply automating as much as possible in that regard.
In fact, it's in the Kuiper belt where the first companies seceded from Central Command and expanded towards outer objects and eventually set out for the Oort cloud. My knowledge is limited. I would say it takes less than 5 years to reach the Oort cloud. You could have a basis set up in 25 years and from there colonize surrounding objects with more ease. There won't be any concern for scarcity for the foreseeable future. That is, in terms of materials. Human resources have been the main important asset for the success of these operations. This has been the way it's set up from the first day, and those fundamentals are still in effect to this day. When the first pioneers set out, technology wasn't developed to such an extent that automation could be considered as one of the possibilities. Even then, no automated system can truly replace the role of human conquest even if they are being enrolled today. Yes, there is automation and artificial intelligence, but they serve human command and won't just replace the progress and importance of human resources that have been at the core of these operations from the get-go, and have been developed just as much as other disciplines of human development. A robot wouldn't need to even mine anything in the first place. It could just sit in a corner and be happy. No, due to an egocentric approach, a deeply rooted sense of importance and duty and loyalty has been instilled in the improved breeds of humans, most importantly the upper class, such as scientists, military, command. They have evolved.
How can I join a research project on these bases? I'm a scientist.
Right now Earth is only interesting for mining companies for trade and medicine. Our population is a good repellent against a potential takeover since we are quite useless and unproductive, and unfit to compete with their social order and technology. But we tend to share diseases around until we develop immunity and vaccines that can be traded in return for technology. But now it's a problem where every once in a while they dig up the same pathogen that causes them to abandon an installation and move to the next one. They call it the Fermi fever. This one has no known origin and they are hesitant handling it to do more research and develop their own cure, when they could just as well relocate. Right now there is reason to believe they are considering releasing it on Earth, let it run its course, and when our global order is destroyed, move in and take control. It's a big dilemma since on one hand I support our integration into the modern age of space exploration. It is also my duty to protect our interests and trying to establish a diplomatic solution with our superiors. But I'm running out of ideas, companies are getting impatient, and it's a waiting game for one of them to invade and subject Earth to their system and take our resources.
Fermi fever. Well, let us help. I mean, who can?
Unfortunately nothing can be done. You may have noticed already soft disclosure coming out in the past years, and at this point I wish it was aliens. It would be much easier to explain and there would be no moral consequences if anything happened. Depending on what narrative they spin, you should start worrying. If it goes towards that this tech could be from black book projects, it's good news. If the narrative goes towards fear-mongering and alien invasion, it means whatever is about to happen, no party wants to take responsibility for it. But I'm not the highest authority in these matters. More intelligences are involved, as well as other wealthy and powerful elites. It is also possible that these sightings are the result of Earth citizens having gotten their hands on technology, threatening the powers that be. Maybe that is someone like you, a vigilant, there to strike back at any hostiles, or perhaps something more sinister. I haven't been briefed well since my latest emergency, and with crises emerging and communications down I might as well take it here to gain some attention. If I'm being left in the dark my mission is jeopardized and my loyalty lies with Earth, allowing me to whistle blow. The people who need to know this is their call for action.
An alien pathogen infecting a human doesn't make too much sense from an evolutionary perspective. Not sure about the exact details, but the settlements have breathable air and gravity around 1G. At least the ones I know of. Well, of course they have breathable air, but how can you create all these habitats on places like the moon have 1G of gravity? In space you can create artificial gravity by inertial force when rotating something, a space habitat or a hollow asteroid, but how do you achieve it on the moon or Mars? I love the idea of there currently existing human settlements all over the solar system, but there's a lot of issues concerning the technical aspects of all these stories. Interesting stuff, nonetheless.
These are only issues because of your limited understanding of their developments. Walking around like you would now on an installation on an asteroid is possible. Earth is advancing science in its own speed, we'll get it to eventually. The same can be said about your evolution argument. Your understanding of evolution and the solar system is limited.
Fair enough. Another question, have they done any exploration or attempted some sort of colony or whatnot on Venus? I'm more fascinated by that hostile planet than Mars.
When we still had a say in things, Venus was long considered a good tourist destination. Plans were drawn to launch Heaven's Resort, a luxury Zeppelin hotel in the clouds of Venus, much like a yacht at sea. Unfortunately, space exploration took a different turn as miners became obsessed with accumulation of wealth, and expansion of their syndicate and self-interest. Now Earth missions are restricted to whatever they allow us to discover. Our halting efforts in space exploration and scientific developments are deliberate. But off-Earth, development continued in the same speed as it did before on Earth. Our major advancement in the past 70 years are touch screens, while World War II saw jet propulsion and stealth technology. This should make anyone suspicious. Not that anyone has the power to make a difference, and if they do, they risk being sabotaged. Musk is far more inventive than it seems. He just perfectly knows what he is allowed to do and what not. That car in orbit is a huge fuck you to Space Command. Anyway, Venus is mostly used for waste disposal. Well, if an invasion is imminent, I have forewarned you, and you can use this information to protect your loved ones. Save this thread. Narrative is being pushed more and more to aliens, which is a good indicator they plan to restructure Earth. I wouldn't hold it against you to defend against hostile powers. I'm sure that whatever they throw at us, pockets of survivors will remain. To what avail, I don't know. But as long as there is humanity, there is hope. I must stress that at this moment I am in the dark as to the current state of affairs, which is unusual, but if there was an emergency I'd be informed, so I can predict the future, but things are unstable right now.
Is any of this the reason why humans haven't stepped on the moon in 50 years? And also there are reports that the first astronauts there reported spacecraft there. Was it the people that had settled there before and not actual aliens?
Absolutely. Early space missions were so successful that they became autonomous and authority came under their own command. All we could do was sit and watch in anticipation, but gradually it became clear we were losing control and they got ahead of us. There were some incidents to try to regain control which ended in a downed craft in the Nevada desert and subsequently being unable to reverse engineer it. We sent our best up there and they said, "So long, sucker." Eventually all we could do was beg, and since then we help them any way we can in return for whatever bone they throw us. Under Trump some of the early days optimism is back. Which is good. Nothing prevents us from establishing a presence in orbit and developing our own technology, and it opens up more doors with our off-world relations either by improving our own tech or by making trade easier with a space-focused economy. That's what Trump does. When there is someone higher up he needs a favor from, he isn't going to be depressed and play the victim. No, he takes initiative, makes a friendly gesture and starts a conversation. He did the same with Russia, North Korea.
Invasion imminent. How would they do that? Do they have nukes or some other unfathomable weapons? I mean, from what you said, there's only a few thousand people out there vs millions of military around the world. Did the technology gap get so wide in just a few decades?
It depends on their goals. They can persuade governments to surrender peacefully and from there subject the population with an iron fist. If they want depopulation, an outbreak is very precise in targeting large populations and leaving infrastructure intact. But yes, their military is more developed than what we can conceive.
I have a few questions. You said there is no major conflict, so there still be like covert ops, like Earth has a hostage problem on a mining world, like a diplomat never came back or heard from him, what they'll do, like make a great interplanetary media campaign or not?
They are not belligerent and they are smart enough not to start a fight with somebody they are already more superior to. That said, we do have some defensive and offensive ability, but only to stall them, nothing to hold off a major assault or to pressure them with. I will leave it at that for OPSEC.
And this brings me to the second question. The media are interplanetary or local?
Earth is a closed, isolated environment. There is propaganda, some sinister too, but nothing you see on TV isn't made by people on Earth for people on Earth. We don't share any of our networks with settlements. They don't have TV, internet, porn.
Third question, just because on this board we speak about religion and conspiracy etc. etc. Religion will still be a thing, and would conspiracy theory remain like instead of New World Order like New Universe Order, a cabal of mining facilities who control the Earth government and stuff?
They don't control or dictate what happens on Earth, but they do monitor us, manipulate certain events and actively play a role in our scientific advancement. They even do it in such a way that no world government gets the upper hand and that a balance between powers is maintained. They feed breadcrumbs, always keeping a distance between us and them. But this is not sustainable, a long-term solution must come.
I feel useless now, but trying to be optimistic while pretending doing something useful for our scientific community.
Don't feel useless. We need positivity. Imagine being a poor villager in Africa. Would you stop digging a well just because Westerners have tap water? Don't give up on. You are on Team Earth.
They don't have porn. Wow. I call bullshit on that one. Even the astronauts here took some Playboy magazine to the moon, and you expect us to believe some humans in far-off space on the solar system since the 50s don't have porn to bust a nut every so often? By the way, how is sex like in space? Or rather, what's it like in a microgravity environment?
I can speak for the other companies, but the one I'm affiliated with show a tightly organized daily routine for all their members. They are on a lifelong mission. You are so accustomed to perversion you don't even realize plenty of communities on Earth abstain and have no access to porn or avoid it willingly, with proven results in fertility, happiness, productivity and health.
Their military is more developed than what we can conceive. I take it this takes into account all of Earth's black projects? All of the suppressed technology as well as the super soldier programs? For example, one weapon that's issued to super soldiers is a fully automatic railgun that fires millions of tiny needles per second. It's capable of piercing through the most heavily fortified bunkers from far away with a single tap of the trigger. DRS. What does that stand for? Can't integrate our population safely without it being seen as an act of war. Have they considered taking people from Earth and getting them acquainted with off-world life? Bring them to a colony and have them live there for an entire year. Have them immerse themselves in that kinda life and mingle with the people there. Maybe even find a simple job for them to do. Kinda like an exchange program. Except they don't send any of their people to Earth. Other than that, try looking into the new Swabian Nazis. Just in case they wouldn't mind helping with defending Earth. Even if they don't care for the people of Earth, an invasion might eventually become their problem. Also, I heard about this secret military force who acts as a backup security system in case all of the militaries of the Earth were to unite together and attempt to overthrow the elites. They're either known as the Always, or the Always is the secret group who purchased the security contract. They have smart contact lenses with embedded AR abilities. They also possess nano-body paint armor that's capable of withstanding a nuclear missile strike at point-blank range. Just in case the Nazis are unable to defeat the off-worlders, these guys should be able to.
We have 3 categories of tech. Stuff that came from us that is publicized, that is, GPS, stuff that came from us that is classified, and stuff from space that is classified. Stuff in space used to come from us, now they are self-sufficient. But they still work from the basis we provided, so we can estimate which projects they have been able to finish. They have projectile weapons and energy weapons, plasma and radiation. Just like we do, but they're a step ahead. The one limitation I know they have is restricted use of AI in defense situations. War and combat are uniquely human situations, and they are still in the process of tuning AI to reliably operate a system that can make better decisions than a trained person, before fully automating their defense apparatus. DRS is data relay system, in which machines communicate on long distances using lasers. Your proposition of taking terrestrians on exchange is inadequate. First, it's inefficient to expend resources into an asset there is no use for. They're not going to want to babysit tourists. Second, there's too many people and not enough capacity to re-educate enough people at a time. The birth rate on Earth is higher than people can be taken in. They would just be another handful of nut jobs who add nothing to the global consciousness, even if they do speak the truth. The space program was birthed from Operation Paperclip in conjunction with U.S. intelligences. There was no ideology on our agenda, the goal was purely to get our hands on jet propulsion to be the first to mine ores from space and boost our economy. Aside from technology, indoctrination was equally important in ensuring an efficient and fail-safe staff. But their success worked against us and they seceded. We never predicted this could happen. I'm not officially briefed about Antarctica, but it's an open secret they have their Earth base there. I suspect a legitimate Nazi presence was holding off there for decades after the fall of the Reich, under command of Hitler from Argentina. And that our operation was thwarted due to infiltrators who then landed on Antarctica and rescued the personnel. This implies that our German assets in Operation Paperclip had not surrendered and managed to covertly direct a coup against Earth Command. After all, the indoctrination and mind control techniques we applied were in part adopted from Nazi techniques. Evidently, we underestimated the success of those techniques, and the level of conviction of Nazis as well. What Antarctica is used for now, I don't know, because I have been taken to the moon, but it's always been clear that they have been selective in what they share with whom. It's clear that there is still a propaganda campaign against these supposed long-dead antagonists, leaving me to wonder what powers are still involved when they have to come up with PIC-related,